And I remember looking down National Street. It's one of the only streets in Somalia with a paved road.
Now you are about to see something the public has never seen before.
I'm the last vehicle out, and that street, it's about 8:30, 9 o'clock in the morning. It's glimmering.
One of the most famous battles in U.S. history. It came to be known as Black Hawk Down.
Like shining gold down the entire street.
A Black Hawk helicopter was shot down. 18 Americans were killed.
And I'm like, what on earth am I looking at right now? This town is nothing but dirt and sand and blood. What am I seeing?
This is Super 6-1, moments after it was hit by a rocket-propelled grenade.
And then it dawns on me, that's shell casings, that's brass casings. This road is so full of brass casings that it looks like the ticker tape parade in New York City. Every inch of the road is sparkling from the sunlight from brass casings.
Fucking Wizard of Oz.
We shot that much. I was thinking, we shot that much ammo tonight? That's insane.
Welcome to Mic Drop, the podcast where relevancy is irrelevant and we don't give a shit about your feelings. Ladies and gentlemen, as always, it's both an honor and a pleasure to welcome my next guest to the podcast. He spent 23 years total on active duty in the U.S. Army, primarily with the 3rd Battalion, 75th Ranger Regiment. He's been in the invasion of Panama, the Battle of Mogadishu in Somalia, and 9 Afghanistan deployments and 5 Iraq deployments. Do the math on that. The guy has spent more time in harm's way than half the people have been alive. He's both an author and a pastor, so he's a man of the cloth that can read you your last rites and get you introduced to the man upstairs. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the stage, Jeff Struecker.
Man, it's good to be with you, Mike.
Did I pronounce your last name right?
It's long Struecker, but it's all good.
Yeah, well, I screwed that up already. Probably should have checked before we went on air.
Don't worry about it.
Yeah, that's pretty standard around here.
Yeah.
What's the best thing about being a pastor?
Well, being around people. There's some pretty amazing people, and I stayed right outside of Fort Benning, that military community that I spent most of my career. The people that I have a chance to see in church, they're incredible guys and gals. That's without a doubt the best part of it.
Most people wouldn't be in the Fort Benning area except for being stationed
unless
there.
You had to be, right?
You chose to stay there.
Yeah.
What's the hardest thing?
The people. Yeah, definitely,
best
man.
and hard?
No, I mean, there are a few walks of life that you unfortunately spend a lot of your day dealing with the real problems of life and the real ugly stuff of life. Law enforcement does that, man. The military does that, as you and I know. And unfortunately, pastors spend a lot of their time dealing with people that are going through really ugly stuff and walking through it with them.
I mean, it seems like kind of similarly, because you're dealing with people at their lowest point in a lot of cases. Yeah. Do you find that a lot of times it's almost a fair weather thing where you're only hearing from people when things are going, like no news is good news?
Yeah. Early on when I transitioned into ministry, that wasn't my day job when I first joined the Army. But when I became an Army chaplain and then retired and became a pastor, I thought like most of my day is spent with people that are in crisis, and I don't ever get a chance to see people when things are going great. And I had to really work to churn my schedule a little bit so that I could be around people at their good days, not just on their worst days.
Yeah, well, that's got to take a toll over time, I would imagine.
Yeah, well,
Yeah. What is your favorite childhood memory?
Great question, man. I have my sister and I are really, really close. She's a couple of years younger than I am. Jenny and I were always together all the time. And there were some points, early teenage years. I'm about 2 years older than her, so I'm 14, she's 12, I'm 15, she's 13, and Jenny and I just kind of went through life together, had a couple of just amazing conversations, just the two of us trying to figure life out, because we really didn't have parents around very often, and some of my best memories as a child was with my little sister, Jenny.
Yeah, that's awesome. Is she, is it still that way?
Yeah, I live in Columbus, Georgia. She lives in Atlanta, Georgia. We're about an hour and a half apart. And to this day, she's one of my favorite people in the world.
Yeah, that's awesome. What's the last full book you read? The Bible doesn't count.
Okay. Yeah. I just finished a book from a friend of mine in South Africa. He gave me a book called The World Needs a Father. And the book is written by a South African, but it's written from a global perspective. And it's talking about fatherlessness and what it's doing to the world.
Yeah.
Everybody in America knows the statistics here. But if you look at all of the world countries, and what's happening when dad is not at home and what happens to the kids, what happens to mom, it's epidemic. Yeah. So that's the last book. I just knocked it out a couple of days ago.
Yeah. I'm going to take a quick break. I do want to let you guys know the way that you can support the show is to support our sponsors. I know some people don't like to hear ads, but that's how I do what I do for a living. So any support you can show for our gracious sponsors is much appreciated. And again, it does support the show. So thank you. What are the two key components for canine success? That's effective training and proper nutrition. Fueled by Team Dog brings those two components to your family and best friend. The perfect nutritional balance that results in a higher mental acuity, energy, overall vitality, and even an improved appearance. Every product you will find in my company's store was born from the battlefield and not from the boardroom. Let my life's work help you become your dog's hero. What's the last cheery book that you read that's not faith related?
Yeah. Great question.
Harry Potter.
No.
Not Harry Potter.
Actually, I've been really fascinated by the OSS. I haven't really put the time and the work into learning who the OSS were. So I just finished a book it is the funniest book I've ever read in my life. And it's a true account of a guy who was in the U.S. Army, recruited into the OSS. And he's basically describing the whole training process and doing a couple of operations. For your listeners who don't know, the operations, or the OSS, the Office of Strategic Services, was the U.S.'s version of spycraft in World War II before the launch of the CIA. In fact, the OSS became the CIA.
What's the name of the book?
Yeah, so you guys have to get this book. It will keep you rolling on the floor from the very first page to the last one. It's called You're Stepping on My Cloak and Dagger. And everything that this guy describes, you would recognize it, but the way that he looks at it, the way that he describes it is just hilarious. Yeah. So all of that initial training in the Army, all of the spycraft, all of the stupid planning, all of the crazy missions, he just has a slapstick way of looking at it. You're stepping on my cloak and dagger. It's hilarious.
Yeah, that's great. Good recommendation. First 3 hours of the day every day in a normal morning routine. What's that look like?
First thing I do as soon as I get out of bed is I do what I call, air quotes, mornings with Jesus. I spend about 20, 30 minutes reading the Bible. I read some theology every morning. I read some church history every morning. I call this my way of keeping both edges of the blade sharp. Do some praying, and then I'm out the door working out. So I'm going to get up early in the morning, like 0:30, stupid early in the morning, 4 o'clock in the morning-ish guy. And I'll spend the next hour and a half to 3 hours working out, try to get back, get changed, and get in the office by 8. So my first 3 hours, 30 minutes of it is with Jesus, and then an hour and a half to 2.5 hours.
Similarly with Jesus.
My body. Yep.
Yeah. What type of workouts?
Yeah. So I'm a distance runner. I've been a 6-day-a-week runner for 40 years. But over the last 9 months, I started transitioning to mountain bike because in about 3 weeks, at the end of November, I'm going to do this international competition, the first and the only American ever to try this thing on a mountain bike, what's called the Munga, subtitled The Toughest Race on Earth. And I started training for this thing in the middle of February, been on that mountain bike like 6 days a week since mid-February, and I'm just about ready to go compete.
What's the parameters of it?
Yeah, so the race has been going on for about 10 years. It is the summer months in Southern Hemisphere, so this is the hottest part of the year in South Africa. It is single stage, no stop, no sleep, no support. You're on your own when the gun goes off, and you got to cross the finish line 725 miles later, and you got 5 days to do it. And you're doing it across the desert of South Africa.
So I'm going to ask probably the most obvious question is why?
Yeah.
Why would you do that?
Well, one, I love multi-day endurance events. So I'm a guy who did Best Ranger for several years, and my partner and I won it in '96. But that's not why I'm doing this thing. I'm an old man now. I got some gray in my beard.
Don't we all?
Yeah. The real reason I'm doing this thing is kind of a fundraiser and to raise awareness on veteran suicide. So, a lot of people like you and I, we know the statistics, but a lot of the rest of the nation just doesn't get it. And they also don't know why is the veteran rate, suicide rate so high. So I started this thing as a way of just raising awareness more than anything else.
Yeah. Man, that's really awesome. Really awesome. That,
big charity that I'm trying to support called the Three Rangers Foundation. And they're
That's
just
really
trying to
cool.
help dudes transition well.
That's badass. So I'm assuming you've got, like, is it like saddlebag, backpack kind of thing?
Yeah.
Like,
So the thing
with
is, man, you have to take everything on. You take everything with you, and when this thing starts, you can't get any support from anywhere.
it's 5 days, 700.
Yeah, 725 miles. And there are gates each day. If you don't hit this gate in certain time, you're out. The bottom line is you can carry as much as you want, but the more the weight you carry, the more you have to hump for 725 days.
So what are you taking?
Yeah, I've got some friends that are giving me advice, and they're all telling me, Jeff, don't go too light because you'll burn in, but don't go too heavy because you'll burn in. So there's this unknown magic, middle ground in there. I got to take enough water. I got to take enough food. Obviously, water, as you and I both know, that'll kill you.
I mean, can you take like water filtration?
Yeah, and there are some farms along the road that you can stop and borrow use some of the farmers' water. They've kind of negotiated that with the farmers, but most of it is you take what you need to survive in the desert for 5 days on your own.
At 7 pounds a gallon being gone that long in that type of terrain, I mean, you've got to account for, at least like 3 or 4 gallons a day, right?
Yeah, definitely. So I did the whole planning the equipment, but for me, the biggest part was not sleep. It was not the bike. It wasn't the equipment. It was water. I got to have water, and I got to have water regularly because no human being, I'm not a camel. I can't pack enough water to do those kind of distances.
Wild, man. What food-wise, dehydrated?
Yeah. Most of what I'm taking will be kind of the very short burst of energy, sports, goos and sports bars and stuff like that. But by the time you get a couple of hours into this, your body's going to start burning fat for energy, and that's what's going to have to get you through to the finish line anyway.
A jug of olive oil.
Yeah.
Man, that's wild. Well, are you like posting?
Yeah.
Is there a way to keep track?
Yeah,
of
the race will be tracked live. This race tracking software, everybody will be able to track not only me, but all of the competitors, where we're at on the course, how much is left.
Yeah.
And I'll try to give everybody at the end of the show, if you want, how they can track me during the race.
That would be awesome. I will. That's really cool. And
it starts on the 30th of November, and it runs for 5 days straight.
That's impressive. That's awesome. Well, good luck with that.
Thanks, man.
I'm damn sure going to follow you along. That's wild. So we found out we grew up not far from each other. You're originally from Fort Dodge, Iowa. Tell me about your childhood, other than what I already know, which is you're tight with your sister, and your parents turned you into latchkey kids. How did that pan out?
Mom and dad divorced when I was really young. I had a brother and 2 sisters, and when they got divorced, it was kind of like, who do you want to live with? My brother decided to live with my dad. My sisters and I didn't have no reason to motivate me, but I just decided I'd live with my mother. And no exaggeration, they divorced. I was probably 5 years old when they divorced, and she moved every single time there was a better job offer. So most of the time, I moved 2 or 3 times in one school year. I tell people I did 4 high schools in 3 states. Ended up finishing high school back in my father's hometown of Fort Dodge, but I moved 22 times before finishing high school.
Man, there's a component to that that's valuable.
Yeah.
As an adult, but as a child is horrible.
Right.
Which I think is kind of one of those double-edged swords. Is that I had the opposite deal. My parents stayed together, they're still together.
All right.
I lived in the same house.
Yeah.
Like from when I came home from the hospital until I joined the Navy.
Yeah.
In the same bedroom almost. Like it just. But I will say, like, the component of, or the difference, the contrast between those 2 scenarios after that, I think you're better suited having done it your way, because for me, going to boot camp was like ripping the umbilical cord out for the first time, and it was traumatic. You know, like even as a 18-year-old, like it was devastating leaving home. You know, that was the hardest part for me of boot camp, was just not being at home and like missing my family. You know, whereas it sounds like just kind of just another day. Huh?
I watched a lot of guys get homesick, and I didn't really understand, like, why is this such a big deal to you?
Stop being a pussy.
Yeah, it was only later that I think I figured out, like, oh, this is probably normal.
You had
but
a normal
for me,
childhood.
I was like, it's no big deal.
Yeah. That's interesting. Did your dad harbor any resentment for you living with your mom? Like, did he?
No, I mean, my dad and I have pretty good relationship to this day. When they split up, there was no, hey, you know, there was nothing between the children. There was no war between the children, as far as I know, man. I don't remember most of it, but I moved back in with my dad and reconnected with him while I was a junior in high school. That's when we finally got connected with each other again. The rest of the time I was just moving with mom.
Oh, wow.
And had to figure out, you know, how to have a relationship with my dad really for the first time. And then I left a year and a half later for the Army.
Yeah. You know, I'm interested to hear your perspective, having just read that book about, you know, the absence of fathers overwhelmingly. You kind of had that too, though.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, having lived through it, you know, my dad was around, was a huge and integral influence and big part of my life growing up. Both my parents were. Yours was not.
Right.
It would be impossible to look at your career and your life's path and argue that you're not successful. Why is it that the absence of a father is woefully detrimental to some people, and for other people it builds resilience?
Well, I think in my case, I'll try to answer the general question second, but in my case first, I really, really wrestled when I first joined the Army with what does it mean to be a man? Like, I had no clue. Is it when you first sleep with a girl? Is it when you get a driver's license? When you can vote? Is it when you kill your first enemy in combat? When you can shave? Like, what is it that this is the marker and you now become a man? And for my first year and a half, I just struggled trying to figure out, how do I know if I've made the transition into manhood? I ended up spending time with some really amazing warriors all across the special operations community, just because I was in this clandestine reconnaissance unit. And so we worked with everybody, but especially with this small ranger team that I was in. And I found the model of manhood in those guys, and just watching those guys. I didn't study them as much as just picked it up naturally and learned, man, having a dad in the home that can help a boy transition into manhood is it's essential to who he becomes later on in life. And when you don't have that, I mean, mom can do her best, uncles, other people in the house or in the community can do their best to try to help. But what men need is some man in their life that coaches them, molds them, and then at some point looks them in the eyes and says, that's it, you've arrived, now you're a man. And when there's not a dad in the home, it is devastating. Yeah. And you can see that in villages in Africa. You can see that on Wall Street. You can just see 30-year-old, 50-year-old dudes that are still trying to figure out if I'm a man or not.
Yeah. So to ask you that question again now, where you stand now, what, like, in its simplest definition, how would you define what it is to be a man at this point?
So ultimately, in my mind, a man is a guy who has the balls to stand up and take responsibility for his actions and his family, or the people that God has placed under his care, doesn't run from his responsibilities, and also helps raise that up in the guys in their life too. Yeah. So I think there's not just you and your clan kind of responsibility, but there's the other boys or young men that God has placed in your life that all of us have a responsibility to call the man out of them too.
Yeah, I like it. I think there's a component, and this speaks not just to men, but I think the difference between being a child and an adult, for the sake of definition, I think, when you go from being a net negative to a net positive, in its most simplest definition is that when, at a minimum, like we're talking bare fucking minimum standards here, but is that you go from where nobody has to do anything for you to where now you're actually adding to society instead of subtracting from it. You know, which there's people that never reach that stage, both men and women for that matter. But
there's plenty of 60-year-old girls and boys running around out there. And you and I have worked with plenty of 18, 19-year-old men and women.
Yep, absolutely.
Hard and strong.
Yeah. Did you play any sports growing up?
A little bit, yeah. I ran track. I did a little bit of swimming when I was in competitive swimming. When I was in middle school, ran track, loved it, but I didn't. The schools that I went to didn't have a cross country team, so I ran the middle distance. I was a miler, and only a marginal miler. I didn't really realize I got some skills as a runner. The farther that I go, the faster that I get. Yeah. So I didn't realize that until I joined the Army.
What was your best mile time in high school?
Well, my best mile time, not in high school, is 4:30.
Yeah, that's moving. Quick rundown of the states that you grew up in.
Oh, man. Are you kidding me? Iowa, Illinois, Missouri, Tennessee, Texas. I'm missing one. This is just before graduating high school. Mostly in the Midwest and down in the Southeast.
Yeah. Wow. I mean, you had a pretty good perspective on the collective United States as a high school kid, more than most adults. That's wild.
Well, here's the irony, man. So I joined the Army while I'm still in high school, leave straight for Fort Benning, and I stay in one duty station for the next 10 years and don't leave. And at this point, I haven't been anywhere for more than a year and a half or 2 years until the Army leaves me in one spot for 10 years.
The most stable environment you had was in the U.S. Army. That says something.
Yeah.
What was the light switch moment for you in terms of not having the desire to serve to having the desire to serve? What happened?
Yeah. I give credit to a Navy SEAL, and I don't even remember his first name.
Charlie Sheen.
But, yeah, that's it. My buddy, Tony, in high school, without even talking to me about it, on a whim, we're seniors in high school, and Tony went and enlisted in the Army. And he got one of those jobs where I'm going to make $1 million after I get out of the Army. They're going to give me a skill, and I'm going to be super rich after I leave the Army. And Tony's dad was a SEAL in Vietnam. And I got to know Tony really well, got to know Tony's dad a little bit. And when Tony started talking to me about joining the Army, Tony's dad came up. And I had no intentions of joining the military. It never crossed my mind until Tony joined and didn't even bother to mention it to me. And here's the kicker. The recruiters were going to give Tony extra money, and some extra rank if he could get his idiot friends from high school to join up. So sure enough, I'm one of those dudes.
It's like the Army's turned into a fucking pyramid scheme.
Right.
Like
That's
Amway.
right. That's Tony. Yeah. Anyway, Tony's dad pulls me off to the side when I start to talk to Tony about this. And he's like, okay, listen, man, my son didn't even talk to me about it, but are you seriously thinking about joining the Army? And I said, I didn't even think about it until just last week, but yeah, I'm considering it. He's like, can I give you a piece of advice? He's like, man, my time in the Navy showed me something. And there are basically two types of people in all branches of the U.S. military. There are the guys and gals who join for a paycheck and they're looking for a skill and they want to get out and go do something after they leave the military. Nothing wrong with that. Basically, he was talking about his son, Tony, without Tony being in the room. And then he said, there are a lot of dudes like that in the military. And then you have a handful of people that join the military because they want to test themselves and they want to do something with their life. Go work with those people. And I went to a recruiter's office and just had that ringing in the back of my mind and walked up to this Army recruiter and said, tell me what the toughest job in the Army is. And I didn't even know what airborne rangers were. Wow. And he was the dude who steered me in that direction. But it's all because of Tony's dad's advice. And every day of entire career in the Army, I saw both categories of people. Yeah. Like that guy could not have been more accurate in the way that he described it.
Yeah. That's wild, man. That's one of those, do you think that that's a divine intervention?
Yeah,
kind of thing?
I would have never in a million, I would have probably followed in Tony's footsteps and tried to get some job that's going to make me $1 million. I'm going to make $1 million when I get out of the Army. Yeah. And instead, this simple piece of advice every single day in the military, I saw both groups of people.
Yeah. So you go into the recruiter, you say, what's the toughest thing? He says, airborne rangers. You say, cool, sign me up. You go to Fort Benning. You went right through the pipeline?
Yeah, so here's a funny story, true story. I skipped school. I'm in high school, and it's the middle of the afternoon, and I'm in the Army recruiter's office, which means I'm the only dude in there, and there's 2 active duty Army recruiters. And I literally asked the question, what's the toughest job in the Army? And now there's an argument, right?
Yeah.
I'm at a recruiter's desk like you, and I'm asking him, hey, like, I don't know anything about the military. Tell me the toughest job. And some voice from across the room starts to yell, it's the Army's Green Berets. The Special Forces are the toughest. And my recruiter says, hey, psst, don't listen to him. He doesn't know what he's talking about. The Airborne Rangers are the toughest dudes in the Army. Yeah. And then he basically used this analogy. He was like, Jeff, let's imagine that I were to take a Special Forces A team and a squad of Army Rangers and put them at the Gateway Arch in St. Louis, because this is in Fort Dodge, Iowa. And I tell them both to get to the top of the arch. Let me tell you what Rangers do. They do in St. Louis what they did on June 6, 1944, on the cliffs of Pointe du Hoc in Normandy, France. Man, they're going to throw grappling hooks and knotted hand lines, and those bad dudes are going to climb hand over hand to the top. Special Forces guys,
take the elevator.
They just take the elevator, man. That's all. That's all they're going to do. He's like, you want it tough? Go work with the Army Rangers.
Yeah, that's
that's
awesome.
To answer your question, man, I went straight to Fort Benning, straight to the Ranger Regiment, showed up as a private, left there 10 years later as a platoon sergeant.
So if you could, I mean, I've had some other Army guys on that have done both paths. I won't get too heavy into the training pipeline because we've done that before a few times. But I am curious, at that point, both in your life and in our country's history, in the 90s, essentially, how would you categorize the training, specifically Ranger School, and once you're at the battalion, and how you kind of dealt with it, how it felt?
Yeah. I joined the Army mid-'80s, showed up to the Ranger Regiment 88, 87. And at this time, we're fighting the Russians, and we're in the middle of the Cold War, and everything is about defeating Russia and the Soviet Union. And basic training really disappointed me, man. I go from basic and infantry training straight into airborne school, which for me was like, you got to be kidding me. And then into the Ranger Assessment and Selection Program. And it started to get hard, to be honest with you. It actually got really hard for that very brief window of time. But without a doubt, the most challenging moments of my career in the military was those first 6 months to a year as a private in the Ranger Regiment. And that chews people up and spits them out. Like the attrition rate is about 200% a year for that skill level, that position in the Ranger Regiment, because those squad leaders and team leaders that you're working for, man, they take they're not going to take any mistakes, any excuses. Yeah. And it's not a zero defect environment. It's just they're going to bring the best out of you or you're not going to last. Yeah. And for me, man, I've told people for the rest of my career, the hardest job in the military, hands down, is being a private in the Ranger Regiment. Yeah, it's just brutal.
Yeah, no, I mean, I've known a number of guys that have gone that route and echo similar sentiments. In terms of the Panama invasion, where were you at in your career when that spun up?
Been in the regiment for a couple of years. I was a sergeant by this point, and I was in the Ranger Regiment's reconnaissance detachment. So we were doing strategic reconnaissance missions for all of the special operations forces. And I got notified for Just Cause about 3 days before the initial hit went down. And the regimental reconnaissance team from the regimental reconnaissance forces from the Ranger Regiment flew down to Panama 24 hours before the H hour, the initial invasion, and provided theater level CSAR for the first night of the invasion. Then it was take down the airfields, defeat the Panamanian Defense Forces like you and the rest of the special operations community. The mission inside the mission was go get Noriega. Yeah. And 2 weeks into it, we've got him and put him on a bird and sent him home.
So it seems like a pretty heavy oversimplification of that whole process.
Sure.
But, if we can take a few steps back, I'm curious, back then, there's no 24-hour news cycle, there's no internet. What was your level of understanding, leading up to that was A, even a potential, B, that that it might happen, or like what was your kind of level of intelligence as it related to that prior to it?
Yeah, so because I was in the reconnaissance forces, the average ranger in the line battalion would not have got this kind of fidelity, but because I'm part of the reconnaissance force and working kind of at the theater level for a couple of years by this point, I get kind of the big picture overview. So the fall of 1989, we were getting notified pretty regularly that stuff was heating up down in Panama, and hey, this thing may go down in Panama. And this is the point in the U.S. military where people use the language like, if you ever go to war, like you could serve an entire career and never deploy to combat, which seems unimaginable to people today. But this is how old I am, man. We used to have the old school pagers with the super secret code on there. And the pagers went off in the fall of 89, probably 4 or 5 times. Like, this is for real. Drop your stuff, get your kit on, get ready to go. And then at the last second, they would call the mission off. And so December 19th, it would have been like December 16th, 17th, the whole unit, really the whole special operations community is signing out on block leave the next day, and the pagers go off.
Wow.
And it's, instead of signing your leave form and going back to Iowa on
Christmas
vacation,
in Panama.
that's right, you're gonna board. And when the pagers went off, all of my buddies were like, this is BS because it's going to get turned off at the last second. And I was like, I don't think they're going to play with that many people's leave form. Like, this is for real. So I kind of had an idea of not just the whole geopolitics, but I kind of had an idea of the whole, what was known as Operation Blue Spoon. Like, the real reason this special operations force is going into Panama is to get Noriega. And I kind of had the whole theater level plan before I even flew down there.
I would like to take a real quick break and talk to you about MyBookie. I want you to go to mybookie.com and use my promo code MicDrop, which you'll instantly get a deposit bonus up to $1,000. Remember to use my code MicDrop and bet with me only at MyBookie. Primarily, the only way watching these fights could get any better is to get paid doing it, and MyBookie makes that a possibility. Bet anything, anytime, anywhere with MyBookie. Looking back on it now, no different than any of us looking back at Afghanistan and Iraq, like, do you think from a macro foreign policy standpoint that was the right call for the United States at the time?
I look back on it today and it looks very different from this perspective. It almost feels like a preseason game. Like, hey, we got really punched in the face in Vietnam, and before we fight the next big one, World War III,
shakeout patrol.
We kind of need a little preseason game before we actually start the regular season. I know that's not what it was, but I also think a lot of that was just, hey, this guy is a nightmare, so let's deploy a small package to go in there and to get this guy. Yeah. And of course, every time you deploy guys to combat, it can be, it can turn ugly real fast, like it did for a handful of dudes down there.
Yeah. Was there a point at which your involvement there got to where you really felt like this is the real deal?
Yeah.
And what was that like?
My first firefight, I got into a couple of firefights in Panama. The first one, I didn't really see the enemy because I'm flying in on a Special Ops Black Hawk from one target to the next, and the Black Hawk comes under pretty heavy fire. They have to land and kind of put out the smoke on the aircraft is not doing well. They have to do an emergency landing, but I'm on the aircraft while it's taking fire. And for me, that was the first time, like, I was just trying to figure out what are those noises and why is it doing that?
Yeah.
The first time I'm actually in a firefight is on a hilltop up next to the Costa Rican border in Panama. And my first firefight, man, it was just so overwhelming. All of the noise, all of the sensations, everything that's going on around me. And I've been trained for this for a couple of years, but it's hard to just keep everything, to grasp everything that's going on. And I had a Grenada vet next to me. And that Grenada vet was kind of narrating my first firefight for me. Hey, here's what the enemy's doing. Here's what I want you to do next. All right, prepare yourself for this. And had it not been for that Grenada vet, man, there's no way I would have responded as well as I did that first firefight.
Wow.
Interesting story, though, Mike. His first firefight in Grenada, he had a guy from the U.S. attempt to rescue the hostages in Iran from Operation Eagle Claw next to him.
Doing the same thing.
And that dude had a guy from Vietnam next to him. And honestly, that kind of, mentoring warriors through their first firefight, it's been going on for centuries, really worldwide. But
yeah, man, that's really neat.
had it not been for that grizzly old Grenada Ranger next to me in my first firefight, I probably would have done something pretty stupid.
Yeah. What was the outcome of that firefight?
Yeah, nobody really got on our end. Nobody really got hit in this exchange of gunfire. It just became pretty cool, actually. Like, all right, this is what I thought it was going to be. Without ruining the surprise, man. By the time I get to Somalia, it is a very, very different experience. But my first time getting shot at, it ended up just being a lot of adrenaline and pretty cool by the time I got out of it.
Did you guys take out any?
Yeah, I killed some bad guys. Yeah. Sure.
Do you remember what the?
No, I don't remember what the body count was, but I do remember, man, Panama, the PDF, the Panamanian Defense Forces, they were quick to quit. Like literally in a couple of cases, they let their weapons go, set their weapons down and ran away. One dude locked himself in his own handcuffs and turned himself into me like, hey, I quit, don't kill me.
Yeah. Wow. How did Panama wrap up for you? Like, what was the rest of the?
I stuck around. Yeah, I stuck around. The second phase of the operation is defeat the Panamanian Defense Forces. Sent some guys to David to try to help out there, and then ultimately, by the time we had cornered Noriega in the Vatican embassy, by the time Noriega surrendered, some U.S. Marshals put him on a C-130 and flew him back to the States, and I'm back on an airplane like 2 days later, heading back to the States.
Did you get in more gunfights after that first one?
Yeah, not anything like that Black Hawk or that first firefight. Yeah.
All right, so you guys come home, and then not long after, the Gulf War spins up.
Yeah.
And so now you're activated again.
Yeah. I'm working for 1st Ranger Battalion. Although I serve at the headquarters of the Ranger Regiment, my battalion that I do reconnaissance for is in Savannah. And Savannah gets activated and deployed over to Kuwait as part of Desert Storm. And they send the reconnaissance team in early to do some recon on the border of Iraq and Kuwait. And one of our recon elements gets in a firefight in Kuwait as well. And I'm the guy doing satellite communications back to the Ranger base, kind of, working this geopolitics over a handset, under fire.
Yeah. That was such a quick incursion. I mean, I was in junior high when that happened, but I remember watching it and even at that age, not really understanding much as far as how the world works in that regard. I was still surprised just from, hearing stories of Vietnam and stuff like that it's like, oh shit, the country's going to war again, and it's like a few days later, it's like, well, that's it. It's like, what? Was that kind of how you get?
Yeah, man. What was crazy about that is how overwhelmingly, I don't think anybody, even the big brains in DC, expected it to be that successful that fast. So I remember we flew in, 1st Ranger Battalion jumped into the Kuwait City airfield and then moved. It basically did a movement of contact to the border. I went out ahead of them and went down the Valley of Destruction between Kuwait City and back to the Kuwaiti border. And man, the carnage on that road, it was just like a vivid, holy smokes, man. We laid waste here, and it's really like we gave it to them from every angle.
Yeah.
And I never really saw in Panama that kind of carnage, bodies hanging off of smoking vehicles and just stacked up, just pushed off the road with a bulldozer and stacked, 2 stories high. That's how bad the carnage was.
And that was all. It was primarily our Air Force. It was all airstrikes coming in. Do you remember, especially with where you were at, was there a lot of A-10s doing that?
So about a 5-month-ish air campaign from about 20 nations that just hammered the Iraqi military. And then when we finally start the ground war, we transition from Operation Desert Shield to Desert Storm. By this point, they're in full-scale retreat and running as fast as they can, with the exception of one hardcore Iraqi unit, the Republican Guard. All the rest of them are just hightailing back to Baghdad as fast as they can get there, and hammering away with Tomahawk cruise missiles, with F-16s, F-15s, and A-10s, just blowing stuff up like crazy.
Amongst all that carnage, was there an image during that time that stands out to you that you kind of flashback to almost. I mean,
I still remember seeing Iraqi mechanized commanders dead bodies hanging off of the sides of their vehicles that just got pushed off to the side of the road so that we can open up a thoroughfare to get combat forces to the border and then into Iraq. And I remember like they're just dangling off of the edge of their vehicles. Like we really killed a lot of dudes this way.
Yeah.
And most of it was killed from 10,000, 30,000 feet in the air.
Yeah. Did that have an impact on you at all negatively at that time?
No.
I mean, how old are you at this point?
At this point, I'm probably 22.
Yeah.
21 or 22. I've been around death. Like you, a lot of guys get killed in training. A lot of guys, unfortunately, kill themselves in the military. So at this point, I've been around a lot of death. I just haven't seen that kind of death in those kind of numbers. That's the first time I really saw it.
Yeah.
And it made me think like this is the kind of carnage that they saw in World War II when they were, pushing the flank or pushing the front and advancing, across mainland Europe. Like that's a lot of dead bodies right there.
Yeah. I can only assume that the level of desensitization is thorough and quick in that environment. I know for me it was, the time that I spent in Iraq, like very quickly that kind of Band-Aid gets ripped off. Or, like your first exposure to like legit, combat scenarios and carnage like that, like pretty quickly you're just like, this is just how it is, but at least for me, that's how it was. But I guess I'm curious.
You would get this, the warriors from your audience that are watching will get this. Like there was a point where I kind of rationalized it. Like it's just life and death. It's just killing in combat. Like there used to be this mystique about it. And now that mystique is gone and it is what it is, man.
Yeah. So you wrap that up, you come home from Desert Storm, and then you're back stateside for a couple of years before Somalia kicks off, and that's a whole different ball game as we know. I'm curious to get if you could kind of walk us through the spin up and then ultimately your time there.
Summer of 1993, Somalia is in the news in early 1993 because of a global humanitarian crisis. In fact, I don't know how many people are old enough to remember this, but there was a famine that created a drought caused by a famine, and hundreds of thousands of people were already dead, and they were dying 1,000, 3,000 a day. The whole world was watching this, and even the world's greatest musicians all came together, and they did this ginormous benefit concert called Live Aid, just trying to raise some money to buy some grain to send it into this Horn of Africa that's just decimated by the drought. And the country of Somalia especially, so the drought has affected Kenya, Ethiopia, Eritrea, Djibouti, but Somalia had it the worst. And the country of Somalia has no government. So there's no military, no police force, and that means a dude with a gun can do whatever he wants to do. We're aware, and the special operations community, all branches of the military, the U.S. Special Operations Command's watching Somalia, but it doesn't really look like our fight, right? The United Nations is there handing out food. The U.S. Marines land. The way that the whole humanitarian effort started was with the U.S. Marines landing on the beaches and opening up supply routes and literally give them a bag of rice and a bag of beans, and hopefully they don't die today. That's the way this thing started. By the summer of 93, we all descend in Fort Bliss, Texas, El Paso, for a massive joint exercise. All branches of the military special operations forces are going to do this huge joint exercise. It'll happen all over America, but primarily they'll kind of stage out of Fort Bliss, Texas, El Paso. And we've been there for a week or two. 3rd Ranger Battalion is doing this. Other special mission units are all doing their thing. And we get a call. One company of Rangers gets a call that says, hey, stop training, load on aircraft, fly over to the East Coast. And nobody really knows what the deal is, right? Like there could be 3 or 4 places in the world right now. We'll figure it out when we get over there. And when we get there, they start showing us like, hey, stuff just went down yesterday in Somalia. Aidid, this warlord, ambushed Pakistani United Nations forces while they were handing out food, and he murdered them all. So the UN Security Council met behind closed doors last night. And the UN Security Council said, somebody's got to go kill or capture Aidid. And so we're going to launch a force, a really very small surgical force to go kill or capture. I say that because people watch Black Hawk Down and they're like, wait a second, why are Rangers and SEALs and the rest of the special operations community handing out food? And I'm like, no, that's not what we did. Our stuff was kill or capture. The rest of the United Nations mission was food distribution and nation stability. But we get about 3 days notice and then load up on birds and fly over to Somalia. And it's go take down this guy and the top ranking leadership and get in, do your thing, and get out in 6 weeks. That's the plan.
And so that's the plan. Once your feet on the ground there, what were those first days like, and then ultimately leading up? Like, did it feel as though the sense of urgency to get in and do that job was a burning, kind of direction from the higher ups, or did you have some time to kind of get your bearings, or like what was the vibe like?
So nobody was there to kind of build up the logistics package for us, and there was no kind of mission creep. It was just we went from 0 to 100 miles an hour in one day over there, and I think the whole force was pretty much ready for that. I mean, that's kind of the way we deployed, the way we did business. I radically underestimated the Somali will to fight. So, I've seen dudes in Panama surrender. They surrendered in Desert Storm by the tens of thousands, literally like marched an entire division across the lines and said, we all surrender. When we arrived in Somalia, I'm this grizzly 24-year-old combat vet. Like I'm this super old guy with all kinds of combat experience, and nobody around me has deployed to combat. So I'm trying to kind of
be that
reassure
mentor.
them and kind of do for them what that dude did for me in my first firefight. And no exaggeration, we land on the first day at about 7:30, 8 o'clock at night. We land on a C-5 in the airfield and go take over a airplane hangar by force, and that's going to become kind of our base of operations. And by 10 o'clock that night, we're under mortar fire. And the mortar fire is really accurate. In fact, it lands on the operations center roof and blows satellite antennas off of the roof.
Wow.
And I looked at my men. I'll never forget it. I looked at my men and I said, finally, America has found an enemy that's willing to fight back. That statement was a radical underestimation of their will to fight. To this day, Mike, I've never seen a place anywhere on earth that's willing to send everybody. And I mean, every woman, every kid, every man, everybody go kill Americans. We don't care how many people have to die. Everywhere else, there's been a little bit of restraint, but not in Mogadishu, man. It is send everything, and we don't care how many people have to die in the process.
So in hearing that, I can only do two things. One is make an assumption, having not been through that, and two, seeing in Iraq and Afghanistan elements of their society that are similarly dedicated.
Yeah.
When you contrast that to Panama and Iraq, to me the clear thing that stands out, again, just in my mind, is hired guns that are, whatever. It's like, we're in the military, but like, this isn't my fight. And as soon as it gets bad, fuck this, I'm out of here.
Kind of like what Russia's getting today over in the Ukraine, right?
Versus I live here and you're not taking it.
Right.
Like I'll die
over
here
my dead body.
Yeah.
Will you take 1 inch of ground?
Yeah.
I don't think even some of the senior commanders that had combat experience, I don't think that they were aware of how willing they were to send people to die. Like I've never seen a society that was that willing to send people to their death. And two things that really, really, most of the guys that were over there in that fight with me struggled with is the Somali rebels would use women as human shields, and they were banking on the U.S. kind of sense of morality and the rules of war. Like they would put a woman in a doorway with her legs spread and her arms on her hips, and then they would line up 2 or 3 deep behind her, and they would put their AK-47s between her arms and between her legs, and they would literally use her as a shield, hoping that we wouldn't shoot back. So now I've got gunners on top of my Humvee with a 50 cal, or I've got dudes with a Mag 58 machine gun saying, I don't know what I'm supposed to do, man. I know how to kill the enemy, but what do I do with this human shield in the doorway? Or worse, Dad would run across the street and get shot and killed while he's shooting at us with his AK-47. Then his 14-year-old son would run across the street, pick up Dad's AK-47 and shoot at us and get killed right there. And for most of us, Dad and the 14-year-old son were not a problem, but then here comes the 9-year-old son or the 7-year-old son to pick up the same AK-47, and now the dude on the 50 cal is saying, do I kill this 9-year-old? Like, I'll kill the 14-year-old and I'll kill Dad, but this 9-year-old doesn't know what he's doing. And that AK-47 is going to kill me. Do I kill him? And that, I think, most of my buddies really, I don't think any of us, as a combat leader over there, I had to coach my men through that. And I don't think any of us were ready for that. Like, do I kill the 9-year-old kid? Because he doesn't know what he's doing. He's just doing what Dad and older brother did. And a lot of 9-year-old kids got killed over there.
I mean, it's hard to, I mean, the way that you describe it makes it feel like you're standing there. Like you do a really good job at painting the picture of what it was like. How hard was it for you, and what did you tell them?
Yeah, every dude, I couldn't take away the mental struggle, you know, kind of the emotional, I want to use this word spiritual, the emotional and the spiritual battle going on inside of them. Like, do I pull the trigger? Do I kill this kid? Because he doesn't know what he's doing. I couldn't take that away. But what I could do is take away the legal ramifications. So my men are on the Humvees and they're saying, there's bad guys in that doorway. They're hammering away at us, but there's a human shield. There's a woman with a long flowing dress as a human shield in front of her. Can I kill her? And they're saying, Sergeant, do I have authority to return fire? And I, without hesitating, yes, you have my authority, kill her. And by the way, if there's a court martial tomorrow, it will be me because I'm the one that ordered it and not you. Don't flinch, don't hesitate, pull the trigger and kill her so that you can kill the guys behind her. Was she standing in that doorway because she wanted to or because she was forced to? I will never know. I'll go to my grave not knowing that. Does that 9-year-old kid that picks up the AK-47 and the dude that's on my vehicle saying, Sergeant, can I engage him? Yes, without hesitation, engage him or else he's going to kill you. What I could do for them as a combat leader is kind of give them the moral and the military authority to return fire. But the emotional, man, the psychological struggles that go along with that, nobody can do that one for you. Like, you're going to have to carry that one. That's some heavy luggage that you're going to carry for the rest of your life.
Yeah. So were there instances for you personally where kids under the age of 10 picked up a rifle and you shot them?
All around me. There's a scene in the movie Black Hawk Down that to this day, I don't know how it made it in the movie. But I also realized, and this is just where my faith comes in, man. Like, I know my job. I'm good at what I do on the battlefield. I know how to fight and kill the enemy because I've been trained really, really well. But I also know I don't answer to the U.S. government. I answer to a much higher power than that. I answer to a holy God in heaven. And there's a couple of times in Somalia where everybody else around me naturally is returning fire. And I'm like, hold on, guys, wait. Let me see how this thing develops before you just engage this dude in this situation. So if you've seen the movie Black Hawk Down, you see this really old man walking up to the convoy of Humvees. I'm on the Humvees the whole time the battle is going down. And he's carrying like a 6-7-year-old kid who's obviously already been shot and killed by us. And this kid is limp in his arms and he's just dangling there with blood all over him. But this old man is walking up to our Humvees and he really looks nefarious. Like something doesn't add up here. And you know, like this is where the sixth sense, the hair on the back of your neck is standing up saying, man, I don't like this scenario. Like something is not right. So the guy starts walking at us and I'm like, man, I don't know if he's going to drop this kid and he's got a hand grenade he's going to drop in the vehicles. Like what's going on? But he's walking right at me. And so I instruct the guy in the back seat, like, hey, I need you to put a couple of rounds into the wall right next to him. Don't shoot him, but make sure he knows that those rounds are right next to his nose. And maybe he'll turn around and walk away. And he does it. So I'm carrying a magazine of tracer rounds just so I can mark targets for the 50 cal on top of my Humvee. And I take my magazine of tracer rounds, hand it to the vehicle behind me, because I'm still directing fire. Hand it to the guy who's sitting in the back seat of the vehicle and says, I want you to put a couple of tracer rounds right in front of his nose. Don't shoot this guy, but he's getting really close to us now, and I'm starting to get nervous. put some rounds in the wall next to him, and let me see what he does next. And now everybody's getting nervous, like, hey, he's just a couple of meters away from us, Sergeant. What are we supposed to do? And the guy doesn't flinch. He just keeps right on walking directly at me, like me to you, look at me in the eyes. And I'm like, this is not good. And so the dude in the back seat's got his, his crosshairs right on the dude's forehead. And he says, what do you want me to do, Sergeant? And I said, nothing. Just let him go. Let him walk. And he walks right between the vehicles, doesn't even look to the left or to the right, just keeps on walking like he's a zombie, and walks through the vehicles and keeps walking to the other side. And I really think this is a dad carrying his son, and he wants to die because he's in such anguish over losing his son. But we let him go. And he walks right through the Humvees and keeps right on walking. And everyone else around me wanted me to kill that guy, wanted him to die before he got to the Humvees, but I just couldn't bring myself to do it because he, at this point, really showed no legitimate threat to us. But man, that was a really tense moment. There was a lot of tense moments. That was one of those really tense moments where I had to remind myself, I may have all of the military authority by the laws of warfare to kill this guy, but I'm also going to have to answer to a holy God in heaven. And
I mean, so ultimately, was it a gut feeling, or what made you not?
Yeah,
do it?
ultimate was I cannot kill an innocent man, and this guy right now has I see no weapon and he has shown no threats, but this really looks bad. So until he shows a threat, and then I think he had 5 muzzles, probably had 5 red dots on his forehead, but he didn't know that. So it was like, hey, as soon as he shows a threat, we're going to drop him. But if not, just let him walk through. And nobody lets a civilian walk through a convoy in the middle of a firefight, but I just couldn't bring myself to pull the trigger.
Wow, man, that's intense.
And to this day, man, I have no idea how this makes it in the movie Black Hawk Down because it didn't show up in the book. It wasn't in the news articles. It's just like I'm watching a movie for the first time, like saying, how the heck did that's the exact same thing happen? How the heck did that make it into the movie?
Were you consulted at all on the movie?
Well, just the actor who played me, like he spent about a week training for this role, and he and I spent about a day together before they left to go film. And he said, "Man, I'm freaking out right now because I've played some real people, but they were all dead.
Yeah.
And now I got to play a guy who's really alive. So you got to help me make sure I get this role right." And he nailed it, man.
It's interesting you say that. 13 hours. I don't know if you've seen that.
Oh yeah.
So Glenn and Ty, both really good friends of mine, they were killed there. The main character in the movie, also played by John Krasinski, is also a really good friend of mine. The difference between the 2 actors that played Glenn and Ty, like they did not do a good job. Yeah. No bust on them. Sure. They never met him.
Right.
John Krasinski did a masterful job of imitating his mannerisms, the way his speech patterns, like the way he stands. Like I was like, holy shit! Like my level of respect for John Krasinski, like 1,000x'd from watching him in that role. Just knowing the guy as well as I do, and seeing him be able to mimic and imitate that was fucking impressive. It was really neat.
Well, even some of my buddies that were on set, I wasn't there, but my buddies that were on set were saying, Jeff, the dude who played you, he was acting like a ranger on set. Yeah. Like he was the squad leader, and he would step back and let his men eat chow before he did, even though he's just an actor. Yeah. And he was like, they were saying, this dude nailed it, man.
And who was the actor that played you?
Guy by the name of Brian Van Holt. Right. He's done a bunch of other movies, a bunch of other TV, but he did another movie and played another ranger. And I was like, Brian, you should just sign up, man.
Yeah. And did they use your name in the movie?
Yeah.
I'm curious to get, like, when you saw the movie the very first time, what emotions did you have, and what did you think?
Well, first, I was really angry that they were making this movie and using the real name. So I had worked really hard. I'm at the midpoint of my career. I've been in clandestine units the whole time, and I want to stay under the radar. And then I hear the Army, not me, but the Army has given them permission to use the real names. And I was furious, man, because now my cover's blown. I don't really have much of a cover anyway, but whatever cover I had, it's blown now.
Yeah.
And so when I finally got over that, that's when I met Brian, and Brian started talking to me, asking me questions. And I was like, Brian, if you're going to do this, Let's do it right. I'll tell you everything you need to know. Actually, he called me from set. They filmed it in Morocco. And he would call me saying, hey, tomorrow I'm doing this scene. Can you tell me what was going through your mind? He nailed it. But when the movie came out, the production studio arranged for a screening for the 3 primary units. And one was in Fort Bragg, one was in Fort Campbell, Kentucky, and the other one in Fort Benning. And we're going to invite the families of people killed, the guys that were actually there, and some of the active duty forces. And it'll be the producer, the director, all of the big movie stars, the author, like everybody will be there, and we'll show you the movie, and then we can talk about the movie after it's over with. But no matter what you think, it hits theaters in a couple of weeks.
Yeah.
So the movie starts to play, the credits are rolling, they got the music in the background and those words on the screens trying to describe what's happening in Somalia. And I remember immediately I started to smell Somalia all around me. And I started to feel like, oh, I'm getting ready to get on the vehicles and roll out there, and I'm about to get into a firefight again. And I had to consciously, my wife was right next to me, and I had to consciously tell myself, this is just a movie. You're in Columbus, Georgia. Your wife is right next to you. This isn't Somalia. And if had I not told myself that, I think I would have been diving under seats and, running down the aisles. It was that intense.
Yeah. I got to tell you, between riding motorcycles, working out a fair bit, traveling on planes, I listen to a lot of music and other podcasts doing research for this show. And I just came on to Raycon wireless earbuds. And I got to tell you, they are a fraction of the price of some of the other big name brands, we'll call them. But they sound fantastic. They work great. The sound quality is amazing. And they stay in. More importantly for me, like taking my helmet on and off or doing lots of different exercises, I always have a hell of a time keeping the earbuds in, and these stay in phenomenally well. They've got 8 hours of playtime, 32 hours of standby time, and they're a phenomenal product. I mean, they feel well built, they charge fast. They're a fantastic product. I'm real stoked to be working with them. And right now, if you go to raycon.com, that's RAYCON.com, you can get 15% off if you use the code MicDrop. So that's raycon.com/MicDrop for 15% off. And again, they're already considerably more affordable to some of the other brands out there. So I listen to them and use them all the time. Fantastic quality. I can't recommend them enough. That's raycon.com/MicDrop for 15% off. To me, I saw that movie and was blown away at how well done it was.
Yeah.
I thought they did a good job.
It. Yeah, absolutely nailed it, man.
Yeah. If we can take one step back, you've outlined some pretty pivotal and intense moments throughout that engagement. Can you give us kind of the timeline of I know the movie is what it is. Like it's not like it hasn't been detailed, but from your perspective, can we kind of synopsize?
Yeah, 18-hour firefight. My job, I'm a Ranger squad leader now, and my platoon's role is to do the ground forces for every target that we hit. So of the 7 targets that we hit, 6 of them go in by air. One of them is an entirely ground operation. But the plan is always go in by air, assault the target building, and then go out by vehicles. So the vehicles launch usually as soon as the air assets get in the air or before they do, so that we're arriving on target by the time the helicopters are pulling off and dropping off, and fast roping in Rangers and special operators. I've got a couple of SEALs with me on the Humvees for most of the time that we're out there.
They were shit bags too, weren't they?
Oh, man, those dudes were amazing. Some pretty incredible shooters and SEAL snipers that are with me, and to this day I have the greatest respect for them.
Was Gardner one of them? Yeah, that's awesome. He's been on here.
Yeah, so
that's badass.
My role is I'm the lead squad, which means I have to navigate through this labyrinth of city streets, but we don't have maps. There's no military maps. So there's one satellite photo that I have, and then everybody else is using basically like a pencil crayon sketch of the city. And it's just an endless amount of side streets and alleyways. Once you get in there,
all well marked, of course.
You got no idea where you're at and what you're doing. So I'm the guy who's leading the convoys in, the first vehicle in, and usually the first vehicle out. We go into the Bakara market. Everybody knew this is going to be bad. And like you're fully aware, the problem with this one is we're doing a daring daylight raid, and nobody wanted to do a daring daylight raid. But two high profile targets in the same building at the same time never happened. And President Clinton's staff has given us a lot of crap about being there for so long. You got to get this thing done. You got to get out of there. So the JSOC commander, General General Garrison, launches the force to go get these guys. And as soon as we get there, man, we're already under gunfire. But it's far enough over our heads that I'm not that worried about gunfire. It's 10, 12 feet over my head. So I'm more concerned about, what's happening on the ground right around me than I am the guys that are shooting at me. Most of the guys that were out there, though, this is their first time legit being shot at, and they don't even recognize the distance between a round that lands 6 inches over your head and a round that goes 12 feet over your head. But one of the things that happened immediately on infill is Todd Blackburn, this young ranger, missed the rope, and he landed in the city streets head first, and he was already unconscious and hanging on to life by the time I show up at the Humvees. So my boss, the battalion commander, Colonel Danny McKnight, orders me to go fight my way up to block Blackburn's blocking position, get him on a stretcher, get him on my Humvees, get him back to the JMAL surgeon, and get him immediate medical attention. And when I get up there, man, it's ugly, it's bloody, and he's in bad shape. And I have to put him on the Humvees, and I haven't even been on target for 5 minutes when I'm already taking my squad and escorting Blackburn back to the base. Without going into 2 hours worth of details, on the fight back to the base, we come through the most intense gunfight I've ever been in my life. Nothing is even close. 10 times more than any gunfight I've ever been in. And hit from every direction, vehicles just shot to pieces, and the dude who's the ranger who's got a machine gun right behind me gets hit in the forehead and killed instantly. And I have to make that fateful call on the radio that tells my boss, hey, Pilla's dead. And just like the movie, man, the whole command net goes silent because everybody just heard, we just took our first KIA. But more than that, I think everybody's thinking, this is bad, like really bad. And I think it's going to be me next. I think that was the thought that was going through everybody's mind. I find my way back to the base, drop Blackburn off. Dominic Pilla, the guy who was shot and killed, they take him off the back of the Humvees, and now I learn that 2 of our aircraft have been shot down. Now, fun fact, 6 Black Hawks are carrying troops that day, plus we've got attack aircraft in the skies, attack helicopters in the skies, but 5 of the 6 Black Hawks get shot down. 3 of them are able to limp back to UN or US bases, but 2 of them go down in the city. So when the first Black Hawk crashes in the city, Cliff Wolcott's bird, we put the search and rescue force. This is the reserve, right? We put them in at the first crash site. Not 5 minutes later, Mike Durant's helicopter gets shot down. It crashes in the city on the south side of the target. Cliff Wolcott's bird went down on the north side of the target, and now we don't have anybody to go out there. So as soon as I get back to the base, man, my boss is saying, hey, Jeff, need you to get back on the Humvees. Need you to mount up and go out to the Durant crash site and see who's alive out there. And everybody knows, man, we're all going to die now. Most of us shouldn't have made it back to the base the first time around. If we roll back out there, all of us are going to die. And I got to credit the whole support team now, man. We needed guns. We need a lot of guns. So I just asked everybody, like, hey, cooks, and the ammo guy and the intel dude and the supply clerk, like, get your gun, get your kit, get on the back of the Humvees because we need bodies. And started to fight our way to the Durant crash site. And that's when we linked up with Homer and some of the other forces from the task force that were on Humvees that were just completely destroyed, like vehicles being pushed that were on fire and immovable being pushed by one good Humvee. Grabbed those dudes, put them on the Humvees, took them back to the base my second time back, and I'm refitting and getting ready to roll back out there because I still haven't made it to the Durant crash site. And this is when the commander says, hold on just a second, man. These are light-skinned Humvees, right? No armor on them. And they're like, man, we're getting hammered on these Humvees. We need some armor. And Les Aspin, the Secretary of Defense, loses his job over this. We had repeatedly said to the National Command Authority and the SecDef, we need armor. And he kept saying, no, we're not sending anything else, man. You don't get aircraft, you don't get armor, you don't get artillery, you don't get naval gunfire, you don't get any of it. It's just you and your buddies get in there, get it done, and get out. So the task force commander calls the United Nations forces and he says, hey man, I need help. We're in a bad way. And the Pakistanis come with 2 tanks. The Malaysians showed up with armored personnel carriers and another U.S. Army unit that was in there. They all showed up, and about 11 o'clock at night, man, we all mounted this big multinational convoy. Can't even talk to each other, don't even share the same language, don't have the same tactics. But me and my men stayed on the same 2 Humvees and spent the rest of the night out there till 9 o'clock the next morning, taking casualties and killing bad guys. And it was ugly all the way up until I'm the last Humvee to make it back in the next morning.
Man. I mean, it feels like hearing you describe it, it's like I'm sitting watching the movie, but with the dude that actually lived through it. It's pretty amazing to hear you describe it. Throughout that night, from the time you guys left, obviously there was, a lot of close calls and battling it out in those couple of iterations going back and forth. But when you did that final push, the one that you stayed out all night, were there any instances during that entire period of darkness that stand out to you as like the most memorable?
Yeah. There was a couple of really funny things that happened that night. And honestly, if you're a warrior, you need a little bit of humor, else this thing can just, mess with your mind. So the dude who was on top of my Humvee was gunning from a 50 caliber. And he had already been grazed across his forehead and was bleeding down into his right eye. He had an RPG went off on the wall next to him, and he took some flaming hot shrapnel in his right hand. And he actually fell down in the Humvee. His hand is sizzling and smoking right next to me. And I was like, dude, let me pour some water on that. Maybe that'll help you out, because we don't have any medical support out here. So you're just going to have to figure it out. But we're taking gunfire from a 3-story building right next to us. And I mean, we're on the edge of the building and the guy is on the roof and he's just shooting down at us. And it's virtually impossible to get around to him because of where he's at. Like the trajectory will never hit him. So we're taking a lot of fire from the building next to us. And the kid on the top 50 cal of my Humvee says, hey, Sergeant, this guy is just hammering away at us. We need to do something about him. And his name was Brad. And I said, well, Brad, I need you to throw a grenade up there. And he's like, I don't have any grenades. I was like, dude, well, let me give you one of mine. I need you to throw a grenade. But keep in mind, this is a 3-story building. If you miss the roof, it's going to fall right down on top of us, right? So make sure you don't miss the roof.
It's a pretty heavy risk versus reward.
So it gets better. So Brad, I hand him the grenade, and Brad looks at me, and he's down in the Humvee for just a second before he gets up, and he has this sheepish look on his face, and he's like, he stalls. I'm like, what's your problem, man? And then it dawned on me. He doesn't want to say it out loud. It dawned on me. You've never thrown a hand grenade in your life before, have you? And he's like, no, Sergeant. I was like, hold on just a second. You are an Army Ranger and an infantryman. How is it that you've never thrown a live hand grenade in your life? And he said, well, I was on KP duty the day that they were throwing hand grenades. So I said, Brad, today is OJT, man. I'm going to teach you how to throw a hand grenade. So here's the deal, Brad. There's a safety. I'm going to pull the safety. There's a pin. I'm going to pull the pin. This has a 5-second fuse, and if you throw it too soon, that dude's just going to pick it up and drop it right back on top of us. So you're going to cook this grenade off in your hand, and I'm going to tell you when to throw it, and you don't get a second chance. You better put it on the roof. So his eyes are as wide as saucers now, because he is freaking out about throwing his first hand grenade. And if he misses, it's going to land literally right on top of him. And I was like, so are you ready, Brad? Here we go. Pull the safety, pull the pin. I dropped the spoon and I put it in his hands. And I said, now I'm going to count and you're going to throw when I tell you to. 1,000, 2,000, throw.
Yeah.
He throws the perfect throw, lands it on the roof, boom, no more gunfire from the roof. And I was like, Brad, consider yourself an expert on hand grenades tonight. You just got the expert hand grenade badge. It was just so funny to watch his eyes when I handed him this grenade, and he looked at the grenade and looked at me totally sheepish, like, I don't want to have to say this out loud, but I was like, let me guess, you've never thrown a live hand grenade in your life.
Man.
Well, you're going to have to figure this one out tonight, Brad.
That's incredible. Man.
One of the moments that I think there's two things that really stick out in my mind. When the sun started to come up, we're taking enemy fire all night long, and it's pretty heavy fire. But when the sun starts to come up, we're silhouetted on the street in these vehicles, and the enemy fire gets really intense, and it's coming from every direction, and it's a lot more accurate. We're taking fire from the street right next to us, and we need some support. Our little birds are hammering away at targets all over the place, and we're getting hit pretty hard from a target right next to us. So I call and say to the C2 bird, like, I need you to cut an aircraft and get over here and strafe this building right next to me. And they find an Apache that comes down and tears up the building, and no more enemy fire. But as we're driving away, I'm the last Humvee out. Like, they made the decision, the last guys in will be the first guy out, which means the first guy in is the last guy out today. And I remember looking down National Street. It's one of the only streets in Somalia with a paved road. It's actually not much of a paved road. But I'm the last vehicle out, and that street, it's about 8:30, 9 o'clock in the morning. It's glimmering like shining gold down the entire street. And I'm like, what on earth am I looking at right now? This town is nothing but dirt and sand and blood. What am I seeing? And then it dawns on me, that's shell casings. That's brass casings. Wow. This road is so full of brass casings that it looks like the ticker tape parade in New York City. Every inch of the road is sparkling from the sunlight from brass casings.
Fucking
like,
Wizard of Oz.
We shot that much. I was thinking, we shot that much ammo tonight? That's insane.
Man, dude, that's crazy.
Yeah, that image will stick with me. Like, that's a lot of that kind of brass casings is millions, literally millions of rounds of ammo on that street that night.
Dude, that is nuts. I'm curious from a tactics standpoint, and understanding, like, this was basically the first legit engagement with Somali fighters, so it's impossible to compare it to, say, Iraq or Afghanistan, where it's sustained and they learn and adapt. And because the tactics used in both of those places, there were certain entities or pockets of fighters that were incredibly tactically advanced and competent. But it sounds like the Somali fighters is almost like zombie tactics.
Yeah, that's about right. Yeah.
Which is no less difficult to deal with. Right. In some ways it's harder because there's no regard for their own safety or life or whatever. Did you ever have any encounters where almost like that video game of just like...
Yeah, in fact, a couple of the Somalis were hard to kill, meaning they would take 3 or 4 rounds without any body armor.
Yeah.
And it didn't dawn on us right away, like, what's going on. So the Somali warlords, they controlled the local population by fear and guns, but they also recruited fighters with a drug. It was an African plant. The root of the plant acted very much like cocaine, and the drug is called khat, spelled with a K, K-H-A-T. They would chew the root of the plant, and you could tell that they were chewing khat because it was like chewing tobacco, but it would leave their teeth green.
Green?
And, the root itself was green. So when they were chewing khat, they would kind of have this super strength, no moral restraint whatsoever, and the drug gave them, raw energy for 45 minutes or so, kind of like a, I don't know, an amphetamine or something else out there. So we would hit a guy not once, not twice, but 5 times before he would actually go down. And it was because khat was keeping him up on his feet, and he would keep on advancing even though he had been shot. And it really did feel like this is the Walking Dead right now, man. This is crazy.
Yeah. You guys are using green tip too, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's part of the problem also, but because we ran into that in Iraq. I mean, there was a guy that I remember we shot just south of Tikrit. We had this ambush happen the night before we went and assaulted the palace and the whole city of Tikrit. But I mean, once we recovered him, I want to say it was like 17, 18 rounds in his torso, and he fucking ran for almost 100 yards.
Crazy, right?
We shot the gun out of his hands. It was It's crazy. There was a bullet hole in each of his hands and in the pistol grip and in the stock of the gun with blood on it. Shot the gun out of his hands, hit his torso over a dozen times, and he ran for almost 100 yards before he went down. It's nuts, and that's all with green tip,
right.
But I remember hearing about the cot stuff and that element from a mentality standpoint. I don't know if you're aware or not, but I know from a pain threshold and a brazenness standpoint, it amplifies everything. Does it make them from a mentality standpoint like they're high as fuck? Where
that's what it is. So it's not that they're super aggressive. It's just that they've pretty much lost their mind temporarily and got all of this energy that they can't control. So
it's like PCP.
Yeah,
like
man. It's basically like for 45 minutes, I can do whatever I want to do, and nobody on the planet can stop me.
Be testing for that in the UFC fights here.
I was going to say, you have to do a lot of killing. You have to shoot a number of times just to get the guy to hit the ground.
Wow. You said there were two instances. The one was the Wizard of Oz ammo covered streets. What was the second one?
Yeah, and the second one is that building that we were getting hammered, and we didn't have enough attack aircraft to go target it. So they called in this Apache, from a conventional unit, and he got up in the air real quick and engaged the target next to me. We had to kind of pass the messages through our command net, but that dude took the target out, took out the threat. No problem, but never even worked with those dudes before.
That's amazing. Obviously, the movie is great. The book's been out. The story's been told
countless times. Yeah.
Is there anything that the movie got wrong and or was something left out that you wish had been put in? Yeah.
So the movie really downplayed the violence. Understandably so, because I don't think any audience could stomach the amount of killing that we did. It really downplayed the size of the crowds. At one point, I had to fight my way through a crowd of not a few thousand, but 50,000 people in the streets, because it's the food distribution site and it's time for them all to go get a bag of beans and a bag of rice. So they all descended to the food distribution site while I'm fighting my way through them. And I had to part the crowd by putting 50 cal rounds over their head. And even then, they couldn't get out of the road fast enough. But the movie also significantly downplayed the women and children aspect of it. And man, true story, when I got back from Somalia, I got asked by the brand new mayor of New York City if a handful of us combat vets from Somalia would come to New York City and walk in the Veterans Day Parade and carry the American flag, the New York City flag, our unit colors. What a great honor. By the way, that mayor's name was Rudy Giuliani. And when we were in uniform and going through the subways, getting ready to assemble at the start point of the Veterans Day Parade, we got accosted in uniform, man, by dudes in the subway that were spitting on us, no kidding, and calling us baby killers because of what the news had reported. And the movie deliberately downplayed that because just the moral implications of that, I think, was more than they wanted the audience to have to sit through or have to wrestle with. So because of a few things like that, people say, hey, Jeff, was it accurate? Well, man, it's a movie. It's not a documentary. But even if it was a documentary, there's just some things that there's no way an audience is going to be able to stomach. I'm really proud of the way that Black Hawk Down turned out. But it's not, just so that your listeners or viewers know, it's not close to the real thing in terms of violence and killing and some of those moral complexities that we had to go through.
Were there any components of the movie that, like, any big ticket things that were left out that you're like, why the fuck is that not in there? Like,
I mean,
other than what you said.
Yeah, so my role was very different, being the guy on the ground the whole time. The dudes that went in by helicopter, they had a very different perspective. And the movie focused a lot on the force that went in by helicopter and much less on the Humvees. And I think rightly so. That's where the majority of the force went in, by helicopter. The Humvees were kind of an afterthought. And there's some things in those Humvees that really should have made the movies. Not me, but the guys around me that really should have made the movie. But they never made it to the book. They never made it to the overall story. So it would have never made it out there.
Could you share?
Yeah, I mean, some of the courage that I saw on those city streets, I've never experienced anything like it before or since. Everyone the kind of courage that I saw was just unprecedented. One of the guys that really should have been, and I'll mention him by name because he's given me the permission to do this, a guy that really should have been mentioned is John Mesahunis, who leaves my Humvees at about 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock at night and moves on foot to the Durant crash site, he and one other guy. And he arrives at the Durant crash site after it's already been overrun, after the bodies are being dragged through the streets and desecrated. John Mesahunis doesn't get the credit that he deserved. That dude went on foot through crowds of thousands of armed bad guys.
With him and one
just
other guy.
him and one other dude to make his way to the crash site just to see, is anybody still alive here? And Mesahunis' story doesn't get told. It should, but it doesn't get told. But there's a dozen other examples of that don't get told too.
Yeah. What from your service record, I guess the Silver Star, is that from?
That's from Somalia. Yeah, just got upgraded. Hey, I really want to say this. The movie, I think, wrongly downplayed those 4 SEALs roles in Somalia. They kind of showed them as being stuck out in the city streets and not really having much of a role to play. Man, the SEALs that were right next to me on those Humvees were absolutely awesome, and they don't get the airtime. There were some Air Force CCT guys and PJs around me that don't get the airtime, and the movie should have depicted them, and it didn't. And I'm bummed that those guys didn't get the credit that they deserve.
Yeah, I can only imagine. I mean, no different. Something as simple as conducting this interview, like there's just not enough time to cover everything, and so there's always going to be shit that gets.
But it
left
almost
out.
makes it look like what they did is unimportant.
Yeah.
And all of us that were there would say, man, those dudes were amazing.
Yeah. In speaking to the underplaying of the amount of violence and killing, specifically as it relates to the civilian body count, or I guess just in general, is there a way to quantify or put a number on, even if it's ballparking, a range for that matter, of about how many KIA on the other side there was?
International Red Cross rolled in and kind of put some estimates out. So just to give your viewers kind of a perspective, we put about 200 guys in the city, 200 shooters in the city streets that day. The next morning, 18 dead, 73 wounded, roughly half the force shot or killed or wounded. But the International Red Cross says we killed at least 300, wounded somewhere between 8 and 1,100 more. That's their best guess. But no one, the international community, even our intelligence assets, couldn't give us accurate numbers. I think most of us who went in on the target that day thought there'll be a couple of hundred bad guys, 200 of us against 300, 500, maybe 1,000. When we came out, I think most of us would say, I think we were talking more in the range of 10 to 20,000, not 100 to 200, more like 10 to 20,000. So you know the deal, man. When you do that kind of math, you're going to get doesn't matter what your tactics and your equipment is, you're going to get the same results with that kind of math every time.
Yeah. I mean, is it safe to say, from your perspective of being on the ground, one of the only guys that was on the ground the whole time, that there's probably thousands of KIAs?
Yeah, the amount of killing that we did compared to the damage that they did. Let's be honest, man, they did real damage to us, and we're really, really well trained. But the amount of damage that we did to them far exceeds it. And most of the most significant killing was done from the air by the little birds. Yeah. And those dudes, all night long, their guns were just red hot all night long, keeping the rest of the city at bay while we were in there trying to fight our way to those 2 crash sites.
Yeah. Wow, man, what a story. I mean, it's been told. I've seen the movie, I've read the book, but getting the in-person account from you is special, man. I appreciate it.
I can't say enough about those pilots too, man. Some of those dudes flew for 18 hours nonstop, putting rounds on the enemy, just trying to keep them at bay.
Yeah. An incredible story. Man, I can't thank you enough for sharing it. It's awesome.
Yeah, brother.
All right, so when you, I'm curious, I mean, does the movie do a good job at the after of what it was like that next morning, like once it's all over and you're legitimately done, like the adrenaline dump, the emotions? Walk us through that.
There's a couple of things that I don't think I was, and I've already been to combat twice before Somalia, but the next day we're all at the Pakistani stadium. There's a soccer stadium that's controlled by the Pakistanis. That's the closest UN place to us from where the fight went down. And we all descend on the Pakistani stadium. And now the The field of the Pakistani stadium is just nothing but bodies. And I mean legit bodies everywhere. There are stretchers over here with dudes that are just hanging on to life. There's stretchers over here of dudes that have an arm or a leg, but we know they're going to make it. The body bags are lined up over here. And then we're all trying to figure out, wait a second, what about X? What about Y? What about Z? Where's Shugart? Where's Gordon? Where's Ray Frank? Where's Mike Durant? Like, we got some people missing. That part spread like wildfire through the Pakistani stadium. And that was my first chance to ever, that's when the adrenaline stopped flowing. That's when I was finally able to say, okay, maybe I'm going to walk out of this city streets alive today. And I became numb. And I mean like totally numb. I'm looking at the body bags that are stacked up over here. I'm looking at the dudes that are bleeding out on the stretcher right here. And I got nothing. No emotion whatsoever. And I think I was just so exhausted, both physically exhausted and emotionally exhausted, that I didn't have anything left in the tank until a couple of hours later, when I was able to get just an hour or two of rack where I could start to process what I just went through.
Yeah.
It kind of surprised me because I'm sitting on the hood of my Humvee with run flat in the tires, and 3 of the 4 tires are shot flat. Like, wow, man, those things are not supposed to go flat. That's a lot of bullets.
Yeah.
But I had trouble kind of attaching the emotion to the event until a couple of hours later.
Yeah. I have a dumb question.
I don't think there is such a thing. Go for it, man.
Maybe that sounds like a challenge. Throughout the entire 18 hours, you drank water.
Yeah.
Did you eat anything?
No. Copenhagen.
Did you go to the bathroom at all?
I did. I'd run out of the Humvee, go run to the vehicle or to the side of the building next to me. The gunfire picks up, and I was like, "They're trying to kill me while I'm going to the bathroom out here, man. These guys are insane."
Yeah, because that's a long gunfight.
It is.
Nothing I went through was ever anywhere near that long.
I always thought, well, the sheer adrenaline will keep you awake. At 3:30, 4 o'clock in the morning, I'm droning while bullets are still flying and landing next to me because I'm so exhausted.
Yeah. That was one of the things, about being in Iraq that I think, like, from an adrenal fatigue standpoint is so tough, is that, like, you can only do that for so long.
And your body can't live on that.
Especially when it's week after week after week. It's just like, you get to where it's like you crawl under a fucking Humvee while shit's going on. Right. It's like, whatever, it's weird. Man, it's such a crazy story. How long did you guys stay there after it was done before you came home?
So the hardest day of my life, militarily speaking, is about a week later. We've negotiated, there's been an intermediary there. It's went through the International Red Cross, negotiated to get the bodies back that were being drugged through the streets. We've got Mike Durant back, who was held prisoner of war for 11 days. And we're ready to roll back out in the city streets and continue the mission, right? Like, you sent us over here to find some bad guys. We're here to kill or to capture them. Okay, well, let's go. And the President of the United States makes the call, stop all combat operations, period. Put the task force back on aircraft and send them back to the United States. And by the way, we're reversing course in Somalia, changing the policy and pulling everybody out by March of the next year. And immediately I thought, what was all that blood for? Like, if we're here to do a mission, I will fight to the last man. I will gladly give my life if this mission is that important. You're the president. You decide if it's that important. But if you're going to reverse course just because we lost a whole bunch of dudes last night, you just dishonored all of the dudes who just gave their life last night. And for me, the ultimate slap in the face is when the president said, pack your stuff and get out of here. It really wasn't that big of a deal in the first place.
Man. I can only assume.
And I'll carry that bitterness. Like, people got angry about way things went down in Afghanistan. I'm like, you don't even know, man. That bitterness, I don't want to say bitterness, that bitter pill, I'm going to carry with me for a long, long time.
Yeah. I can only assume that everybody shared that same sentiment. Yeah.
But all of us also said, hey, look, boss, you're the president. If it's that important, we will go to our death for this mission if that's what you want us to do. But don't you dare pull us out early, man.
Yeah, man.
And I got to give credit to all of those presidents that hung in there in Afghanistan and Iraq when the rest of the nation was saying, look, let's just get out of here. It's not that big of a deal. No, man, if it's worth fighting for, it's worth winning.
Yeah. To me, I think that underscores that principle needs to be at the forefront prior to involvement.
Yeah. That needs to be at the forefront of U.S. foreign policy. Like, if we're about to do this, we're going to stick with it until we win.
But on the other side of that token, don't do it unless it's worth dedicating
That's right.
Man. So how long were you there? Like once the combat subsided, a week?
We were maybe a week and a half before we were pulled out of there and sent back to the States.
Wow. So you come home, then what?
I stuck around the Ranger Regiment. Most 95% of the dudes that survived, they punched out of the Army. Few of them went on to bigger and better things. I stuck around the Ranger Regiment, stayed there for several more years. But I had this moment where I had this overwhelming sense that God wanted me to be in the ministry. That's what led me to become an Army chaplain.
Before you did that, when you first got back to the Ranger Regiment, what was that like as far as like all the other dudes that see you guys coming home? Was it like now you're Ozzy Osbourne on tour? Like
it was the exact opposite.
Really?
Yeah. The news portrayed Black Hawk Down as an absolute military disaster, and all they showed was bodies dragged through the streets and a lot of blood. And so even the guys from my unit that didn't deploy, the other companies, they were like, yeah, well, if it was us over there, it would have been different, right?
No shit.
And they were basically saying, like, how did you guys screw up so bad that many people got killed? And what most of us, this is what happened to me. Most of us developed this bunker mentality. Like, I can't talk about this with anybody. I can't tell my family. I can't tell my friends. I can't even tell other Rangers about it because they're all thinking if it was me, it would have went down differently.
Dude, that's messed up.
It wasn't until Mark Bowden wrote the book Black Hawk Down that the opinion of the battle changed, and that took 5 years.
Wow.
The whole world changed their opinion about this, but for 5 years, nobody talked about it. Nobody wanted to talk about it.
That's got to be hard to even put into words, the amount of frustration that you had to have felt.
You know this. As a warrior, I don't need awards. I don't need decorations. All I need is for America to say, we're proud of you. That's all I need. Yeah. And what I heard was, we're not proud of you. You embarrassed us. You let us down for 5 years. And then it was almost, I wanted to laugh at how fickle the public is, because when Black Hawk Down comes out, everybody's like, you're the greatest thing since sliced bread. No, I'm actually not the greatest thing since sliced bread. And it wasn't that much of a disaster. It was what it was. And until Black Hawk Down came out, the opinion didn't change. Yeah. So I just didn't talk about it to anybody.
Man, that's
only to my buddies that were there, because they're the only ones that would get it.
Yeah. Wow. I mean, it's remarkable, truly remarkable. You said that the Silver Star got upgraded?
Yeah. So I came back with a Bronze Star with V Device for Valor, and about a year ago, 28 years later, the medal was upgraded to Silver Star. Not just me, but there was about 20 of us whose awards were upgraded to, the next or several layers higher. And I said at an interview at that big award ceremony, like, I don't deserve the Silver Star, but there are plenty of dudes around me who do. And what's unfortunate is they had to wait 28 years to get the credit that they deserve, because they deserved it, man. They deserved it the next day.
Yeah. Wow. So what was the transformation between going through all of that and then ultimately going into the ministry as it relates to special operations, and how does that work? I mean,
I'll be really brief on this one. So when I'm rolling back out in the city streets in Somalia, getting ready to go to the Durant crash site, my second time back out in the city, I am 100% sure I'm going to die. No doubt about it. But I got no choice, man. I signed up for this. Those guys that are in the city streets, they're waiting on me, and I pledged my life in the Ranger Creed to these guys, man. I can't let them down. And at that moment, I have this rock solid faith. And I just simply kind of surrender my life and my future to God. Like, God, I know I'm going to die, but I'm putting it all in your hands. Like,
were you, air quotes, religious prior to that?
Yeah. Very, very strongly religious. And my buddies knew that. But before I got ready to roll back out in the city streets, I just got to this moment where, like, here it is. Tonight's the night, God. I know it's going to be tonight, and I'm ready. Basically, in my heart, I'm ready to go. And that moment, like, it was like a light switch just flipped, and I felt this overwhelming sense of peace. And I mean, all night long, bullets landed right next to me, dudes getting hit all around me, and I'm totally at peace because I'm ready to go. In fact, when I walked away the next day without a scratch on me, I was like, I don't get it, God. I thought we had a deal. I thought tonight was the night. Like, what happened? Did I get this wrong? So I come back from Somalia, and I start to get this gnawing in my stomach, like, I can't get rid of this thing. I think God wants me to do something different. And I love being an Army Ranger. I wanted to do this until they kicked me out of the Army. Like, that's all I want to do is kick indoors and kill bad guys. And I went to talk to my chaplain, asked him the same 2 questions. I went to my pastor of my church, asked him the exact same 2 questions in the same week, and basically said, I don't know what this is, but I think maybe God is calling me into the ministry. First question, how do you know? Second question, what do I do next? Both of them fell to the floor, had to pick themselves up and say, are you serious right now? And I'm like, I think so. And they both said, well, listen, man, you joined while you were still in high school. You got to go get some school and you got to figure this thing out.
You got to go to Bible college.
Yeah. So I, no kidding, stayed in the Ranger Regiment as an NCO and knocked out a degree and then went off to school before coming back in. I had a break in service and came back on active duty as an Army chaplain.
And so are your Afghan and Iraq deployments all as
chaplain? All of them as a chaplain, yeah.
Before we get into that, I'm curious, the schooling process for theology, is that what your degree is?
Yeah. It's no joke.
Well, I can only imagine. How much of it could you kind of Reader's Digest the breakdown of what you actually learn?
Yeah, so the government requires, and this is a good thing, don't get me wrong, about 9 to 10 years worth of preparation to become an Army chaplain. That's why, well, military chaplains of all branches of the service, that's why they're usually old guys and old gals before they even show up. So you have to have a 4-year undergraduate degree. You have to have a 3-year master's degree, and you can't fast track it. If you have a degree that can be done in 2.5 years, well, you're going to have to add an extra half a year's worth of courses in there.
No University of Phoenix online business.
And you need to do about 2 years worth of full-time work at a church before you can even apply. So in my case, I have 13 years of active duty as an enlisted guy while I'm trying to go through this pipeline and eventually have a break in service, serve in a church, apply, come back on to active duty. Most of the education is designed to help you figure out how philosophy, theology, in my denominational practices, a little bit about the Bible, a lot about, history, and the master's, I'm putting air quotes around the word master's degree. I have a master's of divinity. That word masters used to be, we have now truly made you a master in religion, and now you're ready for anything. But it takes you 3 additional years. There are guys that got a PhD with less training than I got in that 3-year master's. But the idea here is we're going to make you a master, and you're going to be ready for whatever they throw at you when you step into that role.
Yeah. During that schooling process, from a history standpoint, and I know, or I guess I don't know, I'm assuming that depending on where you get your degree from, it's obviously going to vary somewhat, but how much attention is paid to other religions during that? Some
denominations, the degree itself is really dictated by your denomination. Some denominations do a good job of that. Other denominations don't even touch it. They don't even want you to think about anybody else. So
what is yours in?
Yeah, mine is, I'm a Southern Baptist guy, and I went to a Southern Baptist seminary. I went to the Southern Baptist Theological Seminary in Louisville, Kentucky, and they give a little bit of explanation of where everybody else is, but they did a really good job of saying, listen, most of you guys don't even understand where you are. So I wish we could spend a lot of time helping you figure out what everybody else thinks, but we're going to really help you figure out where you are and how you think. And then you do the research on your own after you leave here and figure out where everybody else is on this.
Yeah. From a history standpoint, is it pretty detailed when do they go through from the time Jesus was crucified through all of the different, evolutions and what it meant, and did you get the impression either then or now looking back on it that it's as unbiased as it can be?
So my I really learned to love church history. There was a lot of courses in church history that I had to take, and they covered all of it. Like, hey, let us tell you a lot about the history before the time of Jesus. Let us tell you about some of the history that was going on, world history during the time of Jesus. But most of it was, let me tell you about how the faith has kind of changed over, not changed, but what has impacted over the last 2,000 years in Africa, in Asia, in Europe, and how much it's different, or how much denominations have changed as a result of this. My denomination did a really good job of kind of training me. But I love that stuff, so I read it, literally, I get up and I read it every day. I still read church history every day.
Yeah, I mean, to me, like, I'm full disclosure, I'm not a particularly religious guy. I grew up, in Iowa, real heavy Lutheran, did a lot of pretty extensive, did the 3-year confirmation process, the whole thing. Even the first couple of years in the military was, what you would call a pretty religious person. But I, while saying that I'm not particularly religious now or anymore, I still find religion in all walks of life and historically as it relates to human beings fascinating, and not in a trivial or mocking way. Right. I mean, I respect everybody for their opinions. Like I said, I've had a lot of guys on here that are as good a men as I know, and they are hyper faithful, and I have a truckload of respect for all of them, and I would never disrespect any of that. Is it possible to, in a couple of minutes, kind of hyper reduce Christianity from its inception to now?
Yeah, it's going to be really generalizations, and generalizations can get you in a lot of trouble because there's so much more to the story. But you have one faith that starts off at Jesus's death and resurrection. It's considered the Catholic faith, and the word Catholic I'm using here is capital C, Catholic, meaning all people are the same, universal. That's what Catholic means, universal faith. After a few hundred years, the faith starts to split, and a little bit of that faith becomes Central Europe, Rome, and the Roman influence at 300, 400 AD. And then you have some very faithful dudes that are in Africa that are starting to develop a little bit of a different approach. And the faith goes through a split, and Central Asia, especially Turkey at this time, the Ottoman Empire, that Christian faith starts to look a little bit different than the Western. So you have this, what's called the Great Schism, the separation between the Eastern Christian faith and the Western Christian faith. The Eastern or the Western faith follows a pope who is in Rome and kind of the head of the whole, what's supposed to be universal church. But the Eastern faith is based out of Constantinople. And they're saying, you know what? I don't know that guy is what he's saying is exactly what we're reading in the Bible. So they go in a slightly different direction. And it stays like that literally from about, I think it would be about 1200 AD by the time you have the Great Schism. And it stays like that for hundreds of years until a dude by the name of Martin Luther, who's in the West, says, man, I'm looking at the Bible and I'm listening to what they're saying and it ain't lining up. And I'm a priest and a theologian. And he starts to write down, like he's taking notes, and he's like, I don't see this in the Bible, and I don't think this is lining up. And as I think about it, this right here doesn't seem right. And he writes down 95 problems with what I'm seeing here and what I'm hearing.
Is that where Jay-Z got the 99 problems?
Yeah, that's that. So no kidding, October 31st, 1517, this Roman Catholic priest by the name of Martin Luther nails these 95 problems, called his 95 Thesis, to the door of a church. And it's his way of saying, hey, I need this to go to the Pope and tell him we got some problems here. And now the church has to decide, like, are we willing to change, or are we willing to even admit what this priest is saying? There might be some truth to this. And in a period of few years and a lot of problems, the church decides, yeah, we don't care what this guy says. We're going to do our thing anyway, and blow off those 95 Theses, Martin Luther's 95 Theses. And he very reluctantly says, well, if you guys are not even willing to entertain the discussion, then I got to go in another direction. And that starts what becomes known as the Protestant Reformation, where the Protestant denominations separate from the Catholic Church, and all of the other myriad of denominations that you see out there, they basically fall into one of those two camps. And to just be honest with you, Mike, man, I don't put stock in any denomination, not mine, not anybody else's. As I look over history, I think, man, those denominations have done a lot more harm than good. And basically all they're doing is trying to steal people from one faith, air quotes, to another one, when what Jesus really came to do is to just try to change people from the inside out. So I don't talk about denominations. I don't make a big deal. I pastor a church. We don't even mention denominations in my church because it feels like it does more damage than it does good.
Yeah. To me, the synopsis that you just outlined of the history of the Christian faith, over the span of, a couple of
2,000 years, yeah.
Is vital, and I would say it's absolutely crucial to the understanding of religion as a whole. Is where I think, if you were to ask, anybody who says, "Yeah, I'm a Christian" in the United States, could they describe what you just did?
In fact, if you were to ask the average pastor, I don't think they could do that. But again, I've spent decades in it, man.
But to me, that's a problem.
Yeah, I agree.
I mean, to me, that's like having a president of the United States that doesn't know when the Revolutionary War was, right?
Yeah, that's a problem.
And I think that's a huge hurdle that doesn't seem like it would be that difficult to overcome if there was a little more time in a lot of churches, whatever you want to call it. I mean, it's not a curriculum, but just in their teachings.
Yeah, in their teaching,
to weave in some of the history so that there's an understanding of that. Because one thing that's always baffled me is in that split from Catholicism and Protestant denomination is that there was a period, especially in Europe, for a while where, I mean, they were slaughtering each other.
They killed each other because you were on the other denomination.
And it's like, so you being
it actually went on all the way up until the 20th century, man, because the Catholics were killing the Protestants in Northern Ireland all the way up until the 1970s and 80s.
So the simplest question that I'm curious, as a student of that for years, why?
Yeah, this is where denominations, in my opinion, do all the damage, right? Like you have a denominational leader that he wants to be more powerful. And I'm being very general here and people are going to get angry. I don't care. You have a denominational leader. I want to be more powerful. I want my denomination to be more powerful than that other leader and that other denomination. So I tell you what, let's go kill him. I'm like, are you insane right now? Like, where can you square that with what you're supposed to teach and what the Bible says and what Jesus taught? Like, where does that kind of theology come from?
I mean, it's an oversimplification in terms of a question, but is there an answer to that? Is it that simple? Like, I mean, like, or I would say, it's okay. I understand that that's really why it happened, but to justify it and actually get your followers to buy off on it, that can't be your answer.
Honestly, it's not. It's much more nuanced. It's much more hidden. But at the essence, that's what we're talking about. I mean, Mike, as much as the world would like to claim that this isn't the truth, what the essence of the global war on terrorism is, there's a faith out there that says we hate you. We hate your faith, and we're going to kill you because of who you are and what you stand for. And it is our faith that mandates that we kill you because of who you are and what you stand for. Look, I don't want to talk just about Islam right now because, again, Protestants were doing that to Catholics, and Catholics were doing that to Protestants in Northern Ireland. And people have been doing that. Muslims and Hindus are doing that right now in India, and it's been going on for centuries. And their answer to the how do I become more powerful than the other denomination is kill them.
Yeah. Do you know, I mean, as technology advances to a point where I think decade after decade, or especially after the last 20 years, the advent of the internet, it's increasingly more difficult to snowball people in that way. However, to your knowledge, do you know that over the course of these hundreds of years from the Catholic Protestant split up until the fighting, mostly ceased, what the explanation was on the higher ups of the church to incentivize or mandate to their followers to actually do that?
Yeah, here's where denominations do the most damage. Their tool is heaven. Like, hey, I'm the guy in charge and I decide who gets into heaven and who doesn't. Literally, I have the keys to heaven and I say, you got to go kill some Protestants if if you're going to be a faithful or Catholic, or Mohammed said, you got to kill the infidel wherever you can see him. And if you want to get into paradise, you got to go blow yourself up and become a martyr. And they use martyrdom and heaven as the tool. And let's just be honest, man, that is a very powerful motivator when you're using heaven as the tool.
Yeah, I mean, 100%. I mean, if that's the principal goal of your entire existence as it relates to faith, I completely understand the power in that. I guess I'm curious but okay, you have to kill him, but why? What is Catholicism that Protestant isn't, and vice versa, that's making them say you need to go kill them?
That's where, if you were to just examine the lies, and let's just be honest, man, with the internet, it's getting really hard to distinguish the lies from the truth, man. People are getting really, really good at making the lies look and sound a lot like the truth, which all of us are struggling with fake news. So when you start to really examine the lies that the denominational leaders are saying at that level, it gets really hard. And pretty soon you start to say, wait, man, I'm not sure if I'm listening to Jim Jones right now, or if I'm listening to a legit guy. Like, it gets really hard to parse out those lies, man.
Do you know back then when the split happened and the killing kind of first started, obviously, hundreds of years ago, way before technology, do you know what the reasoning was used for why Protestants would kill Catholics and vice versa?
Yeah, basically they're deceiving you. And if you listen to their priest, or if you listen to their pastors, their priest or their pastors will keep you out of heaven. And I can't get the pastors or the priest to shut up, so I'm just going to kill them. Yeah. And honestly, Martin Luther, this Lutheran pastor, Catholic priest who becomes a Lutheran pastor and the founder of the Protestant Reformation, immediately after the Reformation started, it became riots and people were being killed in Germany over this. And Luther was like, this is crazy. This is not what I signed up for. We were not trying to do this, man. I was just trying to help them see what you're teaching is not lining up with what we're reading in the Bible. And then it becomes killing.
Yeah. Wow.
That fast.
Yeah.
They had to hide Luther away in an attic for a long time because that's how bad the violence got right after this.
Wow. Which is telling, kill the messenger, right? All right. So you go through all of that. You ultimately become a chaplain finally, and now you do multiple deployments to Afghanistan and Iraq. Can you kind of describe what being a chaplain for those guys in those environments, what is a day like? I'll give you this. There is no certain day, because every chaplain, Marine Corps, Navy, Air Force, Coast Guard, I guess the Space Force has chaplains. I don't know what the freak those guys do. Army chaplains, their day is devoted to their unit. So whatever kind of unit you're in, whatever your unit's doing, theoretically, that's what you should be doing. So every day is different because every unit is different and every mission is different. But my first combat deployment to Afghanistan, this is early GWAT, before Iraq had kicked off, and I'm a chaplain. And my first couple of weeks, man, I went through this kind of real struggle with identity on the battlefield. Like, you give me a gun and point me to the enemy, I know exactly what to do. Got no questions about how to handle myself. Now I'm on the battlefield and I'm a chaplain, and honestly, I'm not exactly sure what I'm supposed to be doing next. And I went through this period of turmoil. It didn't last for very long, thank God, but I had to struggle with, I know what to do. I know how to fight the enemy, but I don't know what to do with myself as a chaplain. And I had to force myself to think, Jeff, your role on the battlefield is no longer to be concerned about the enemy. You have to forget the enemy completely, which is hard to do. You need to focus on your unit, on your warriors. And that was for me, that was a massive mind shift. And it took me a few weeks to get there. Once I got there, I was able to do my thing on the battlefield and feel very comfortable.
many chaplains would spend time back inside the fob in their chapel, drinking coffee and, hey, have fun on that target tonight. I'll be praying for you. I was the guy who said, hey, if you got an extra seat, man, I'm going. If you want me to, I'm going. And many more times than not, they said, hey, yeah, we got an extra seat, chaplain, and you're more than welcome to come.
So you'd go out on
I went out on target 75% of the time.
Get out of here.
Yeah, loved it.
Really?
Yeah.
I mean, were you getting it?
No, I mean, most of the time we didn't get in firefights. A couple of times my unit, I went out there with the Ranger Regiment for the most part. I was a chaplain in the 82nd Airborne Division, my first assignment as a chaplain, and that's early GWAT. So I did a long deployment with them to Afghanistan, all over Afghanistan. But my boys would ask me, hey, chaplain, you want a weapon? I got a pistol for you or something. I was like, man, I'm good right now. And they're like, no, seriously, like if you want, we'll hook you up. And I was like, listen, bud, if we get into a firefight and I need to pick up a weapon, I will.
I'll find one.
But you just need to know, if we get to that point that your chaplain is in the firefight, you better pray that it doesn't get to that point, because there will be plenty of weapons on the ground for me to pick up if we have to get to that point.
Yeah. Man, that's wild. So past that, were there any instances where, as a chaplain, you got in a gunfight?
Oh yeah, man. There were some times.
There
were times on target where I was like sucking down mortar rounds sucking down mortar and 107 millimeter rockets in Afghanistan, and I'm like, the next one's going to land on our head. I hope you know where you're going, because I know where I'm going. I'm good. There were times that I'm on gun jeeps in Iraq and heading out to target with Rangers, and there's, IEDs going off, and I'm thinking, man, it might be me, it might be you, it might be somebody else, but it's going to be one of us. And more than a few times I'm on target while there's a gunfight, but I'm far enough. I don't want to be the number one guy in the stack. So I'm not going to be the guy who's doing most of the exchange of gunfire.
Did you, were there instances where you were actually returning fire?
No, I didn't need to. I can't, I'm thinking back. I don't think of one time in Afghanistan or Iraq where I actually had to, engage the enemy. Yeah. I was close enough to him that I could, but I didn't have to.
Yeah.
Because honestly, the Rangers and the special operators that I was with, those guys are so good that they didn't need me picking up a weapon.
Yeah. To me, the fact that you're out there, you've got a gun, and should it come to that, you're ready to get your hands dirty is pretty cool, though. How many other chaplains are doing that?
Man, I did this on purpose. I decided I had to think through this. Like, I want to be the kind of chaplain that I wish I had next to me when I was a Ranger squad leader. And what I wish I had was a dude who knew how to handle himself, but wasn't getting in my way and tripping all over himself and looking like a buffoon. So I tried to get out there. I tried to get close enough that I could be there when guys needed me, but I tried to be far enough back that they weren't stumbling all over me. But more than anything, I wanted to be competent enough out there that they didn't have to worry, is that idiot going to, go off and get himself into some trouble. So that's what I tried to do.
Yeah. I have to assume that, comparing you to any other chaplain, not that it's a dick measuring contest, but especially with groups like that the level of respect, knowing that you were in Panama, that you were in Desert Storm, you were in as thick of the thick gets in Mogadishu, like they've got a mountain of respect. Like, do all of the guys know your background?
Yeah. When I walked in the room, there were whispers, and people were like, I think that's the guy from Black Hawk Down. You know? And I could hear him talking, but I didn't even acknowledge the conversation. So the truth is, man, I got instant respect when I walked in the room.
And
a lot of guys,
well deserved.
Yeah, and a lot of guys would take that for granted, and I didn't. I was like, man, if they're going to give me their respect, I'm going to make sure that I don't ruin it.
Yeah.
And I want to say to other chaplains, those dudes deserve a lot more praise than I do, because they had to fight and work and grind it to get the kind of respect that I got just by walking in the room, because people recognize my name.
But you earned it.
Yeah,
before that.
Yeah,
though,
I earned it in a second life. Yeah, but I took that really seriously.
Yeah.
I didn't take it for granted.
Yeah, thinking of it from like kind of the principal perspective, combat wise, like the thought of a chaplain, a Ranger chaplain being out on target armed. Is there almost like a medieval crusade kind of like?
I don't know if that's the way the rest of them felt, but a little bit, right?
For sure the enemy would think of it that way.
Certainly.
Like, this is a man of the cloth. Like,
I had to really work hard to go in sterile because I knew if they found my uniform on target, they would say, see, it's a holy war and the Americans coming to convert us. So
I mean, you have crosses on your...
I took it all off. Yeah. I went in sterile.
Yeah.
Every time I went in.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. That's smart.
Because if they saw the cross, that would be all the propaganda Al-Qaeda needs to say, see, it's a holy war.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of our guys have patches with crusade shields with crosses on them and stuff. I mean, but, and I'm not knocking that. I'm just saying, like, there's no shortage of that type of propaganda material if they wanted it, I think. But
hey, real quick, there's a second reason I went out on target.
Yeah.
And I've been around enough warriors to know, for some of those guys, the chaplain's like a rabbit foot, right?
Yeah.
Like, hey, if the chaplain's out here, then maybe stuff won't go south. And I'm like, I hope you guys realize that I don't make you bulletproof just because I'm not bulletproof, and that doesn't make you bulletproof. Yeah. But if it'll give you a little bit more confidence on the target, sure, I'll go out there with you. Heck yeah.
Yeah. Wow. Is there a hardest scenario that you've had to either console or do your job as a chaplain in terms of, like, does something stand out?
Without doubt. Casualty notification. I didn't do that very often. And being with the families and walking them through just learning that they just lost somebody. So 99% of the time, no exaggeration, I was in the theater and on target and out in the combat zone, which means there was another chaplain that was back at home station covering rear detachment and had to do all the walking with the families. The 1% of the time that I had to walk with the families through this, I was like, man, I would much rather be getting shot at right now than sitting in this living room right next to his wife or right next to mom and dad and going through this with them, while it's still raw. I did a lot of funerals. I presided over I buried a lot of warriors in Arlington National Cemetery. That was an honor that I'll take with me to my grave. But being with those families, man, I would rather be shot at today than have to sit in those living rooms because that hurts.
What do you say?
That's hard. You can't say anything, man.
I mean, like, how do you, like, trying to put myself in your shoes, like, what do you even try to say?
I don't. I show up. I let them know that I'm here for them and I'm going to stick around, and not just for a day, not for a week, but for the rest of your life. You can call me and I'll be there for you. I was with a mother in Walter Reed when she had to make the decision to pull life support, and her only child, her son, who was a Ranger killed in Afghanistan, when the doctor said, he's not coming back, there's no brain activity, you got to pull the plugs. And I was standing right by her and I let her know, like, I'm going to walk with you through this for the rest of your life.
Yeah.
But I learned early on, like, there's no words to say. So the smartest thing I could do is just shut my mouth and wait for them to talk.
Wow.
And sit there with him. And here's fascinating. Like, I sat there and didn't say 2 words in 2 hours. And then I show back up 2 days later and they're like, hey, what you said last night? And I was like, I didn't really even say anything. But for them, just being there was all that they needed.
Man, I can only imagine the daily perspective that you must have that very few people do because of what you do.
Yeah.
In terms of appreciation and not having your day ruined because Starbucks fucked your order up, is there, I hope that there's, of anybody walking the planet, that somebody like you has the healthiest perspective.
Yeah, I have to, when I finally get to the kind of relationship with a friend of mine and they're going through some struggles, I will finally get to the point where I have to say, you realize nobody's shooting at you right now.
Yeah.
And if nobody's shooting at you, the problems that you're going through are really, I realize they're problems, but they're not that urgent. They're not that big of a deal. Let's just put things into perspective. Nobody's trying to kill you right now. So now go deal with your problems.
Yeah. Who do you talk to?
I've got a couple of buddies. When it comes to struggling personally, I talk to Ranger buddies of mine, enlisted guys that were right next to me in the fight. And those are the guys that I kind of confide in. When it comes to ministry-related things, I got 1 or 2 buddies. I have a mentor. I think every dude, you don't ever get to the age that you don't need a mentor anymore. So I have a couple of mentors that I can talk to, but I don't talk to my ministry mentors about combat, and I don't talk to my combat buddies about ministry, because it's not that those 2 worlds aren't connected. They just don't understand each other that well.
Yeah.
Everybody needs some dudes that they can go to.
Yeah, for sure.
Everybody does.
Yeah, no, I agree. Within the chaplain corps, if you will, militarily, Do you know how many, if there are any other combat veteran spec ops guys that are now chaplains?
Yeah. GWAT caused a number of dudes that were special operators to go over into the ministry. I would say we're talking less than 50, but it's a pretty small group, the chaplain corps in general anyway. So that number is pretty significant given how small special operations are and how small chaplains are. More than a few of them kind of followed it, and they didn't follow me, but they just kind of, the Lord did the same thing in their life that he did in mine.
Wow. Do you know militarily how many chaplains there are?
The U.S. Army has, well, the numbers vary, but there's somewhere between 1,700 total force, reserve, National Guard, and active component. The Navy supplies chaplains to the Coast Guard and the Marine Corps, as well as the Navy, and the Air Force supplies chaplains to the Space Force as well as the Air Force. So I think total force, you're talking about 3,500 maybe, all branches of the service, Reserve and National Guard, as well as active component.
Yeah. I apologize if you covered this already, but to my understanding, there's not a military chaplain academy.
No, there's not. Your local denomination, you basically have to choose a team, you have to have a denomination, and your denomination is where you go to school, and they give you the training that you need.
And so, I mean, is there any military involvement? So it's kind of
what the government does a really good job of is trusting the denomination and saying, okay, we trust you. We trust that you're not going to send us somebody crazy. So we're going to give you, these are our requirements. You don't give us somebody with your stamp of approval if they haven't met these requirements.
Okay.
And all of the denominations that can send somebody to the military, they all kind of agree with the government. Like, okay, those denominations or those requirements seem a little bit extreme to us, but we won't give you somebody with our stamp of approval that hasn't met those requirements.
Okay, but so the United States, or the Department of Defense at least has a...
Yeah, there's some pretty strict requirements. And like I said, man, for most of them, it's a 9-10 year process.
Yeah. Is there one that stands out as being, that would surprise people, that seems kind of ludicrous?
No, not really ludicrous, but I think it's sheer genius. But a lot of people, they don't want to do that 2 years of work in some kind of ministry before you apply for the military. And they're like, why do I need that? I know how to shoot. I used to be in the military. Why can't I just come straight in? Well, you're going to learn some things through the School of Hard Knocks that no classroom can teach you. And we need you to know some things that only you can learn through the School of Hard Knocks. So go work in a church, go do some kind of ministry, then come talk to us.
What would constitute that, or what would check that box?
Yeah, man, you're going to do some funerals, you're going to do some weddings, you're going to do a lot of counseling, you're going to have to manage some budgets, those kind of things we can talk about in the classroom till you're blue in the face. But you actually got to go do it. And when you do it, then you realize, wow, this junk is a lot harder than I thought.
Yeah. I mean, it seems like a significant portion of being a chaplain and just being a person of faith in terms of, I mean, a leadership position.
Yeah.
When you're talking about, counseling, funerals, grieving, like, I mean, you're really as much of a psychologist or psychiatrist, therapy, counselor, whatever, as you are anything else, right? I mean, do you guys spend a lot of time talking about like the human mind and psychology behind it?
Most of the military chaplains that I know, they spend the far majority of their time doing counseling. Yeah, they do lots of other things, but if you were to put everything together, counseling is it by a long shot. That was certainly true of me while I was in the military too. And all of those counseling, they kind of fall into a couple of big categories. Going to counsel guys that are having some real family-related issues right now. Going to counsel some guys that are having some real unit-related issues with their leadership. And then you're going to counsel some guys that are really struggling personally, with what's going on in their world, finances, health, whatever. But it falls down into basically one of those three categories. And I'm talking hundreds of hours every month of counseling.
Yeah. Is there a similar patient confidentiality agreement where anybody, like, unless it's, I'm going to go kill somebody?
Yeah. The U.S. military has this, what's called confidential information, or they have privileged communication is the official term. And that is, you and I are talking, I'm your chaplain, you say something. I know if this goes to a court of law, this would be the thing that would convict you. But I now am, I not only am I allowed to keep it to myself, but I am required not to share it with anybody by military law. And in one case, there was a major incident that happened in my unit. The incident was being investigated by CID all the way up to the highest levels of the DOD. And they called me in and they started asking me a lot of very penetrating questions. And I said, I can't answer that one. I can't answer this one. I can't talk to you about that one. And I basically blew every question off. And the investigators got really angry with me. Like, we know you had these conversations because the people who had those conversations said they talked to you about it. And I said, yeah, but I can't tell you. And I will go to jail before I give you that. Like, even if you were to put me in jail, I'm not going to give you those answers.
Yeah.
Because they're protected under privileged communication.
Yeah, that's interesting. I've had, some in-depth conversations with some other guests, over the years, and I want to avoid getting too far down any rabbit holes. I just wanted to ask one really basic, but I would imagine a common question that's hard to answer, that I'd love to get your take on, and it's a why question, that you probably hear more than anything else, or at least I would assume, is that when something bad happens, let's say it's a grieving widow, it's a Gold Star family member, or, pick a tragedy.
Yeah.
is why would God let X happen?
You didn't even have to say it out loud because I already knew where you were going with that. I've heard that question thousands of times.
How do you answer that? How do you answer it?
Well, there is no good answer. I recognize they're not looking for easy. They're not looking for simple. There is no easy, simple answer here. And I'm going to be honest with them and tell them, listen, God doesn't hate you. He's not mad at you. That's not why this happened. And sometimes when the bullets fly, one guy lives and another guy dies, and no human being on earth can explain it. But I do want to legitimize your question. Like, look, I believe in a God in heaven that is powerful enough that if he wanted your husband to still be alive today, he would. If you're asking me, why did he not spare your husband so that the dude next to him got killed instead of your husband? I can't possibly answer that. Because now what you're doing is you're asking a finite human being to understand an infinite mind, and that's impossible. But I do want you to know, just because it happened to you doesn't mean that God hates you. He's not mad at you. It doesn't mean that your husband was any less of a warrior than the guy next to him who survived. It just means this was God's plan, and I don't understand it.
Yeah.
I don't even try to understand it, so I don't know that I can help you understand it. I just need you to understand that doesn't equal that he's mad at you.
Yeah. Do you ever have, in any of the sessions where you're counseling with grieving folks that are at the highest level of emotion that can happen, where they kind of take it out on you and get mad at you?
Yeah. We were doing a funeral I was doing a funeral with my battalion commander. I was his battalion chaplain for a ranger who was killed in a training accident. He was shot on a CQB range. And this mother was so distraught that she just unloaded on me and the commander and literally said, you killed my son. And if it wasn't for you, he would still be here. And both of us just took it. And we took, even though everything that she was saying wasn't true, we didn't try to refute her. We didn't try to, belittle her or anything else like that. We sit there and took it. And both of us, after it was over with, was like, wow, that sucked. I don't want to go through that anymore. But both of us realized for that grieving mother, she needed somebody to take this out on. And if that, by position, if that means you got to take it out on me, it's not my fault. I didn't pull the trigger, but take it out on me then, if that's what you need to do.
That's a tough spot to be in, one that's crucial, and I don't think many people could humbly do the way that you do. My hat's off to you on that. I mean, that's got to be tough.
Combat leaders, you know the deal, right?
Yeah,
like you make a decision, and somebody may die because of that decision, and people are going to hate you for that decision.
Well, agreed, and granted, yes, I know the deal, but I will say this, is that I also wish that 98% of our leaders, and I don't even want to call them that, we'll call them elected position holders, because they're not fucking leaders,
Right.
don't have that position.
Yeah, you're right.
You know,
They
it's,
don't
"Well,
have
I didn't do it.
They don't have those kind of balls. You're
Yeah,
right.
like-
hey, the classic example of this is Abu Ghraib, right?
Yeah.
The general in charge of Abu Ghraib, when all of that went down, that general said, I didn't do this. This isn't my fault.
Yeah.
And the very same night, Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld said, I'm the Secretary of Defense. You want to point the blame at anybody, point the blame at me. And I thought, fire that general. That man knows what it means to lead. Rumsfeld probably never stepped foot in Abu Ghraib in his life, but he knows what it means to lead.
Yeah.
I'm in charge. You want to point the finger at somebody, point it at me.
Yeah, that's awesome. I had Congressman Alan West on a few weeks ago, and he was wrapped up in some of that Abu Ghraib stuff and ended up losing his job over it. Kind of similar. He was like, yeah, I did it. You know, we were trying to get information out of a guy, and this was the tactic I used. And
I think the general that was pointing the fingers everywhere else and said, it's not my fault, I didn't do it. That
gutless.
Take them out in the city streets and flog them, fire them, and then flog them for what they just said.
Yeah, it's bad news. I mean, if you've got a pastor saying flog that guy, you're pretty fucked up.
That's what I'm saying.
In being in the special operations community, I think I already know the answer to this, but I'm going to ask it anyway. There's a lot of dark humor within the SOF community. And I mean, the military first responders, like, they joke about things and they fuck with each other and whatever. Have you ever messed with somebody like that where you would say, like, hey, why? And it's like, it's because God doesn't like you.
Yeah.
Like, have you ever fucked with somebody like that?
I mess around with guys like that, but I have to know that I got the kind of relationship with them that they're not going to take it personal. Like, if you and I were just talking for the first time, I wouldn't do it. But I've done that more than a few times on the battlefield. Like, hey, you know why these bullets are so close? It's because of you, and God is mad at you right now. So I'm going to go over here to this side of the patrol.
Oh, that's awesome. I'm glad that the sense of humor is even, still live and well, even within the chaplain corps.
That's the only thing that's going to get you through some of those stupid nights, right?
I know it for sure it is. Wow, what a fascinating career and life you've had and conversation, man. This has been really enjoyable for me.
Thanks, man.
I've loved every second of it. I feel like I could talk to you for a few days, honestly, but is there anything else that you want to?
Yeah, man. I got to say this to you. I got to say this to all of your listeners. I don't get in a warrior's presence without saying thank you, Mike. Thank you for what you did for our country, man. And I'm honored to be able to be on the show with you.
Well, it's an honor to have you. I mean, to me, you're right at about a generation ahead of me. I'm not trying to make you feel old, but
I got some gray.
But I think I have more gray than you do, and you're 10 years older than I am. But to me, like, guys in your shoes from that era really kind of set the tone and paved the way for subsequent generations. Seeing the actions and the bravery that was displayed in Somalia was very, very influential for the next generation of special operations guys. Especially, I mean, Wrong, Right, or Indifferent. That movie. I'm glad that the book and movie came out and did what it did for you guys, because if it hadn't and you had gone your whole life feeling that way, I think that would have been a tragedy. But my point is that in saying thank you to you and your guys for doing what you did, because it really did inspire a generation of the next group of Spec Ops guys to pick that torch up and do the same stuff. So it's amazing what you guys went through and everything that you've done and everything that you've done since. Honestly, I mean, you're a hell of an inspirational guy, and again, I can't thank you enough for coming on. Yeah. I hope you guys enjoyed this, because I tell you, if you didn't, slap yourself and then choke yourself, because if you didn't enjoy that, you probably have no business listening to this show. But
probably right.
Yeah. But truly and not jokingly, I appreciate you guys' support. I wouldn't be able to have awesome guys like Jeff come on if it wasn't for you guys tuning in week after week. So thank you. Hope you enjoyed it. And until next time, this is Mic Drop.